I'd never been a big fan of camping before, but circa 2012, for some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property. We had permission from the owner, on the bank of a small lake in the rural American southeast. The lake wasn't very large, probably around 50 to 150 yards across. I'm not great at estimating distances though. It was more of a deep pond, I guess, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization either. We were 5 or 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access, however, and the only way in was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code. We pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. Now, if you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small and the rural people around often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're really not worth building in unless you have some sort of connection or attachment to the area, I guess. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it, in fact, when they were building highways in the 50s. So, not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places since the Civil War even. Now, it's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see stars and hear the sounds of nature, I guess. We were at our very utilitarian camp, small Coleman 2-person tent and a blanket, simply looking around and enjoying the night when suddenly my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sort of sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you, I think." He seemed actually shaken though. "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention and I sat up fully at this point, rubbing my eyes to try and gain full focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces staring back at me from across the lake. Maybe 15 or 20 of them. All of them were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees and only their heads were visible. The best way that I could describe the faces were like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were too young for that, not for at least a few more years anyway. We had eaten dinner at home and we were just planning on going to sleep after chilling out for a while. The faces, they weren't moving though. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes were just adjusting and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or something, but I would just never come to that realization. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then suddenly, they were just gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard extensive shuffling from the other side of the lake, and a couple of small branches snap as well. It's incredible what your ears pick up on during an otherwise silent night like this. My buddy was tearing up a little when he said, "What the heck were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well that night. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping, but I mean, what were we going to do in a situation like this? In the end, we woke up early, we packed up quickly, and we just left. I tried to do some research on the internet, but I never found a phenomenon that would explain this, which is why I'm here. Do you have any theories as to what this could have been? Back in 2018 and 2019, I was outside my house with my little brother, keeping him entertained while my family was out. I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but all of a sudden I just had this feeling that we were being watched. I looked past my brother into the wooded area in front of my house. In the ditch right before the wooded area, I see a figure of a head pop out. It had the head of a fox or a cat or something, I guess. Ear pointed up, white fur, black eyes. Ears were white with the tips being black. As soon as I locked eyes with it though, it sort of shot down. Originally I was going to look into the ditch, but something was screaming at me not to. About 20 minutes go by and my back is facing the woods and my brother is facing the woods. We got into some conversation when he just stops mid-sentence and looks over me in shock and confusion. I look back and we see a black figure run into the woods. We just stared into the woods and I then got an idea and told my brother to go inside and grab one of our flashlights. It's one of those really powerful ones that you can adjust the distance with and brightness, enough to even light up a room even when it's daytime, or when it's completely dark it's like you just turn on a light to a room. He goes and grabs it and he hands it to me. When I shined it on the woods, just slowly searching for something, I stopped near the right corner of the woods, and that's when I see that there are just white eyes looking back at us. We were stunned looking at this thing, and then I realized something. Our house is on a hill, you see, and the woods, they are not. So whatever it was looking at us and standing at equal footing with the hill to look at us. And this hill was pretty large. The eyes kept looking at us, then to the side, and then they would sway left to right. We were watching it and sort of clicking off the flashlight to wait for 5 or 10 minutes to see if it would leave, but it wouldn't. We didn't have our phones with us to take a photo or a video. It never even crossed our minds, to be honest. But we stood there until it got dark, which was almost 2 hours, the figure just looking at us the whole time, occasionally moving left or right. My brother eventually ran inside though and said that he had an idea now and grabbed a BB gun, took aim and tried to shoot at it. The eyes just looked down and slowly back up. He took the flashlight and told me to try to scare it off. Again, I aimed and shot where the eyes were and nothing. The eyes moved like it turned around and slowly turned back to us. 30 minutes go by and we still did the same routine. Turn off the light, wait a minute or two, and then turn it back on, and the eyes just still stared at us, swaying like that. Then, my grandfather came home and we tried desperately to show him what we were seeing, and when we did, it was gone. We tried telling him what we saw, and he kept telling us that it was a raccoon. We kept trying to tell him that there's no way that it was that. I mean, it had to be something else with the size of it. He just snapped at us eventually and yelled that it's a raccoon and not to ask or talk about it again. Shortly after telling him about this though, we moved, out of the blue without warning. But before we officially moved, my grandfather just stared into the woods, shook his head and then looked up. I personally have no idea what I saw that day, but I have a sneaking suspicion that my grandfather knew exactly what we saw, but just never wanted to tell us. I live in a college town with 6 other young girls in our 20s. The city that we live in, it's not that nice and has a huge homeless and drug problem where break-ins are not unusual. However, what happened last Saturday was definitely strange. My roommates and I, as well as some of our boyfriends, were hanging out and drinking in our house, while 2 of the girls opted to go out to a bar. By around 1 a.m, the 2 girls came home from the bar and everyone was tired, so we all went to our respective rooms to go to sleep. Later in the night, I was awoken by someone opening my door and standing in my room staring at me. In my head, I thought that it was one of my roommate's boyfriends, trying to see if my boyfriend and I were still awake to continue to party. Since I was tired, I pretended to be asleep to avoid being bugged. After a bit, the person closes my door and proceeds to pace back and forth in the hallway. They then begin to attempt to open my roommate's door, whose room is right next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked and she also had her boyfriend with her. The person then proceeds to go into our utensils drawer and grabs a knife to attempt to pick her lock. After gaining some courage, her boyfriend shouts, "Who is that?" which startles the man, who then sprints up the stairs and out the door. The police were called and did a search and obviously didn't find anything. They told us break-ins were normal, which we knew. However, what makes this whole scenario creepier is that he didn't steal anything. My phone, alcohol, and $600 shoes were just left there, untouched. We also suspect that this person was not on drugs or alcohol, as he moved very quietly and very deliberately. He was able to get in because the two girls who came home from the bar did not lock the door behind them, apparently. I'm not sure what this man's intent really was, but I am forever grateful that I happened to have my boyfriend with me that night, which is not that often as he lives 3 hours away and pretended to be asleep. It gives me chills thinking that a strange man was in my room, and what could have happened to me if I was alone. When I was 7 years old, my parents and I were living in a basement apartment in the Bronx. The way the apartment was set up had my mother and father's room at one end of a short hall, the bathroom in the middle, and my room at the other end. If you don't know anything about a basement apartment, just know that it doesn't take much effort to enter one through a window. Now, one very early morning, possibly around 7 or 8, I was woken up by a very sharp, pain on my butt cheek. I got up thinking our cat had gotten in my room and had bit me or something, as she used to nip hard and attack at whatever she felt like, toes included. So I jumped up looking for her, only to see a grown man sitting on my bed. I remember being upset and asking him why he pinched me, to which he hushed me and said something about him being thirsty. I remember pulling down my nightgown to cover my butt at that point and asking him if he wanted a juice or a water. I wasn't scared at all, more surprised and mad that this man had pinched my butt so hard. He said that he wanted juice, so I left my room and closed my door with him still sitting on my bed. I walked to the kitchen and got him some juice. As I was bringing the cup back to my room, I looked at my parents' door and thought that I should probably wake them up, but can't remember why I decided against it. And I ended up giving the man the cup, and he drank the juice. I remember he asked me if I could help him find his friend, and him telling me that he was lost. I remember that my dad had told me that I wasn't allowed to go outside without him or my mother, but they were worried as this was a new neighborhood. We had only moved in maybe 2 weeks earlier. I remember being scared to go outside because I didn't want my parents to be upset with me, so I told him that I had to wake up my parents to ask. I remember that he said that it would be real quick because he knew that his friend was somewhere in the area and we would find him quickly. I once again said no and told him that I was not allowed to go outside without my parents. So he ended up saying that he didn't need my help anymore and that he would find them. He asked me to lock the door behind him, so I walked him out and locked the door, waving him goodbye. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was too late. I was awake at this point, so I started watching cartoons. Well, the volume happened to be way louder than expected because my mother woke up and asked me very angrily why I was awake so early. I told her all about the man pinching my butt really hard, to which at first she didn't believe me as she thought that I had a bad dream. But she lifted my nightgown and I guess I must have had a bruise or something. I will never forget how she got so calm and she started smiling at me and with a very sweet voice started asking me what did he look like, what happened, and if I remember what he was wearing. I told her, to which she left my room for a moment, coming back with my dad. She then told me to tell him everything using that same sweet voice, and I did. I didn't think that I was in trouble or anything, and I thought that I had made a new friend. After telling them about my new friend, they got dressed and started searching. And well, it didn't take long because he happened to be the Super's family member. When I saw him, I immediately shouted at him, "Hey, friend." My parents told him to go inside, which I did. Maybe an hour or so later, my parents came back with McDonald's for me, but they seemed really angry. Before the end of that day, my father put a padlock on my door and told me that whenever I go to sleep, to always lock my door as our kitchen windows didn't lock, because apparently that's how he got in. Sometime later, I was 15, I found out that the guy was mentally ill and was sent away from the Dominican Republic by his family so he wouldn't get arrested for something he did out there with another little girl. And yeah, that's about it. It all surprises me that I wasn't scared to this day. But please, if you or anyone you know lives in a basement, ground level apartment, or flat, please triple check that all the window locks work, and always lock your windows up. I moved to a rural area of the North Georgia-Alabama mountains. Sand Mountain was the name of the place, and it was connected to Dade County Gar, but right over the state line in Higdon, Alabama. I was around 8 years old, I think. So, when I first got there, it was a total culture shock, having moved from a large urban area in the southwest. I vividly remember driving through a virtual sea of green right outside of Atlanta. The novelty of the trees soon wore off, and I dove back into a book to stave off the boredom of a long drive to my new home. And at some point, I started to feel really uneasy, so I told my mum. She wrote it off as a symptom of the major life change or something to that effect. I did my best to just accept it as nothing more than that, but the anxiety and the sense of oppression got a lot worse. It seemed that the heavy feeling directly correlated to the proximity to my new home. That was a feeling that I would live with for over a decade as well. I would soon find out that it was nothing in relation to what I would soon experience as well. I cannot say how long it was until it started, but it had to be a few months after we moved into a little trailer at the end of a long driveway in the clearing of the woods. Our closest neighbor was well over a mile away. My room was on the opposite end of the trailer as my mother and her husband's room. I also had a huge bay window, which will be important in a minute. So, it all started kind of odd one night. I couldn't sleep despite being tired from exploring the acres of woods that I now resided in. So I'm lying there, Cartoon Network in the dark, trying to fall asleep, when very suddenly I'm deep in the woods in the southeast of the property. It was a place that I'd been before, but not really much, although I did recognize it, I suppose. It was the strangest feeling, like being a passenger in another's mind, seeing through their eyes but having no control, just sort of going along for the ride, I guess. It was disorienting, to say the least. It exponentially worsened when whatever it was started to move as well. It was an unnatural speed, predatory and precise, kind of reminiscent of the way an animal would stalk its prey, darting from cover to cover, tree to tree. It was a blur until it stopped again, just giving me the time that I needed to regain my bearings, as much as I was able anyway. This only lasted for a few seconds, and I then seemed to snap back into my body again, laying in bed. It was such a strange feeling, and I didn't want to even think about it, because I guess I just didn't want it to be real. But the next night it happened again, and the next after that. After a few days, I realized that each time it was a bit longer, and it definitely seemed to be allowing me to see through it for longer each night. I can't say how long it lasted, but it was long enough to be a commonplace event every night, and enough for me to think that I was perhaps going crazy. One night, though, I was coming up to the clearing that trailer was in, and as I realized this, my consciousness was in this thing's mind to some degree, and an all-consuming sense of dread started to rise up in me, I guess. worsening with every brief pace behind cover. Note too is that, thinking back on this thing just didn't seem to operate in any sense of time and space that we are accustomed to, because it would pick up every night in the same place that I left its mind or whatever. But I don't think it was just frozen there till the next day, right? I think it was playing some sort of game or something. Kind of like when an orca plays with a seal or a cat with a mouse, I guess. But in any case, as my terror reached a crescendo, I was suddenly ejected back to myself. I don't know if I did it or it, but it killed whatever link that it made or had with me. But it was different this time. I sat straight up and turned toward the window instantly, because I just knew that it was there, that it was a few feet outside of the tree line. As much as I didn't want to see anything, I still gathered myself up and looked out the bay window at the tree line. And I will never forget it as long as I live, because it was there, leaning from behind a large tree right at the edge of the woods. It was tall, like really tall, and its skin was taut, like it was stretched over its bones, but I don't really remember any detail of its skeletal anatomy or anything. All its features were grotesquely elongated, like they were stretched out purposely. It had long claw-like fingers that curled sort of around into the common sign that you would use to beckon someone closer to you. Its face was large and humanoid, but with that same stretched-out look. It also had a smile that was impossibly wide, and large, long, sharp teeth sort of skinny and needle-like, and its eyes were really big, even with it being the size that it was. It just stood there as well, staring at me through my window. Then it cocked its head and motioned for me to come to it. I called it the Grey Man ever since this time, although it definitely had no discernible gender. Whatever it was though, it was an animal terror unlike anything I have ever felt, but I found myself having to actively fight an almost uncontrollable impulse to go out to it. It was like it could almost compel me to go with it to the forest. After quite some time, I was able to pull myself away from the window and crawl back into bed. All I could do the rest of the night was wait for it to get tired of waiting, and I guess decide to come to me if it wanted. It never did though, and when the sun finally came out, I couldn't feel it anymore, I guess. This though was the new normal for me. Almost every night, it would come back and just wait and watch. The compulsion lessened eventually though, which was really the only silver lining to this whole thing, I guess. I stopped sleeping a lot, and I would spend the nights in the living room as much as I could, which wasn't often. After quite some time of living with this thing appearing all the time in different places, it got closer at night as well. I don't have a total memory of this night exactly, or I guess I should say that I don't have a complete memory, I think. But after being plagued by this thing for quite a while, it was really getting to me, I guess. I wasn't sleeping, which affected lots of other areas of my life. This, in connection with a tumultuous environment, was quickly pushing me to a breaking point. One night, though, I awoke to this thing, something different, perched on the bottom railing of my bed. The only way that I can describe it was kind of like the faun from Pan's Labyrinth. It looked a lot different from that character, but it's as close to an analogue as I can come up with. It told me, though, that it would apparently get rid of the Grey Man for a price. The faun had a different energy to it than the Grey Man did, but I don't think it was something that was of good intent. A mild, almost predatory, opportunistic sort of thing, I guess. I was, however, desperate and exhausted, so whatever it wanted from me, for whatever price it required, I think I paid it in the end. I don't know if this was a dream or what, but it felt real at the time. What I can say, though, is that I was definitely awake for the Grey Man, that much I'm sure of. It did in the end keep up its end of the bargain, allegedly, and after that, my life did return to a kind of normal pace, I guess. Well, normal compared to that, I guess. I've been visiting my grandpa in Virginia to care for him recently. I grew up going to this house every month of my childhood. It's in Ivanhoe, Virginia, in the Appalachia. It's an abandoned mining town. Growing up in this house, built in 1853, I've always noticed out-of-the-ordinary stuff. For example, the room that I would always stay in faced the front porch, windows, with the rocking chairs. And one night I woke up to use the restroom, looked out the window, and I saw a black shadow figure sitting on the rocking chair, rocking it back and forth with long flowy hair. I heard a woman's humming, and at that I ran back under the covers and wrapped my head in the blankets, along with my toes until I could sleep. This wasn't the first time that I'd noticed that figure, but flashed to other memories. There would be times in my sleep that I would try to sleep, and I'd hear the floors creak, and it always sounded as if something was coming closer. That's when all 9 of my grandfather's dogs started howling and barking. The creaking stopped, and then I heard a breathing or sighing noise, and the footsteps continued to walk, but this time walking away. This was all before I was 15, mind you. When I was 15 though, 21 now, I had a nightmare of the house burning down, and as I ran from the house, I could look back and see the shadow hovering over the fire. I woke up in a cold sweat and set up the cot in my grandpa's room. At 17 years old, I went to stay for Christmas with my mum. As we woke up, we shared the same bed. My mother went to the bathroom, has a sort of window overlooking into the Appalachian mountains, and told me that she heard a humming coming from outside the window, and suddenly the bedroom door slammed shut. Then she told me about the dreams of the house burning, and this was the last incident until I went to care more recently for my grandfather with dementia and Alzheimer's. He wakes up at around 4 in the morning, and sometimes I have to bring him back to sleep. A week into the first time that I cared for him, he woke up at around 4 and sat in the rocking chair on the porch. I woke to the sensor lights beaming into my room, so I knew to go and get him. This time he had been talking to the empty rocking chair next to him, having a full-blown conversation, how the Confederate flag is mistaken for Southern pride or whatever. But I grabbed his hand and helped him up, when a woman's voice angrily said, what sounded like an inch behind me, "Let him stay, for it's cold." I turned around, freaked out, but there was nobody. Then the dogs began to howl again. I need to return soon again to care for him, but what am I dealing with here? What do I bring next time? Is this dangerous? What kind of thing am I experiencing here? When I was around 12, 2008 to 2009, my family, mother and father, and I went to visit some relatives, uncle, aunt, and cousin, in rural Tennessee. We were all sat in the living room just talking while the television played in the background. At some point, I went to use the restroom, but their restroom is situated to the left in a hallway past their kitchen. There are no doors directly adjacent to the restroom door, and I had a bit of a tendency in my youth to open the bathroom door before washing my hands, as to not recontaminate my hands and germs when I exited the restroom. So I used the restroom, opened the door, and as I was washing my hands, I saw someone walking by the door in the corner of my eye. I feel it's important to note that the figure was moving in the opposite direction of the living room. The only rooms in the direction the figure was heading are the 2 bedrooms of the house. Other than those rooms, the hallway is a dead end. I also feel it's important to note that I did not only see this figure in my peripheral vision. It was very slow moving, and the moment that it caught my eye, I turned my head. With both eyes looking directly at the doorway, I saw the figure move past the center of the doorframe until it was out of sight to the left. This figure never once acknowledged my presence, stopped walking, or made any noise. The best description that I can give of the figure is that it was an elderly woman, hunched over. not hunched far over, but in the way that many elderly people walk without being able to sort of straighten their backs. The figure was wearing a seafoam green sort of nightgown that wasn't very saturated, a very light seafoam green with an almost lacy sort of mesh kind of transparency to it, near the bottom of the dress, that is. Enough so that I remember taking note of being able to see the legs moving. The figure wore very thick and rounded square glasses with a transparent brown frame. She had tight, curly, permed, likely greying brown hair that was holding on to the last of its colour. She was also a bit overweight, I would say. I saw her very vividly, though. Like, what I mean is that there was no transparency to her, nor was anything off about her. When I walked back into the living room, I asked the family who was there. All of the previously listed family members were still seated on their respective couches and chairs when I walked back into the living room. At this point, I was under the impression that an elderly relative of my relatives had arrived while I was in the restroom or whatever. But they all assured me that we were the only ones in the house and no one had come to visit after my parents and I. I doubled down, though, telling them that I just saw someone walk past the restroom door. I even described, probably crudely, the woman that I saw. My uncle immediately got up and began searching the house. He started in the back bedrooms and made his way to the living room, thoroughly searching every nook and cranny along the way. But, in the end, there was no one else in the house. I kind of dropped it after that. It was weird, but I guess it wasn't that scary, I suppose. I never once felt frightened, well, at the time at least. But we moved on with the day, and that night I was about to sleep in my cousin's room with him. I had never been in that room prior to this night. Once I walked in, I immediately noticed a picture hung on the wall, and my jaw almost dropped when it was the same woman that I saw. She had the same hairstyle, same glasses. She was the same size and had all the same features. I questioned him about this, and he told me that that was his grandmother, which I knew that they had gotten this house from, but it never clicked in my head. She died in the living room of old age, apparently. He told me that his room was her old room, and when his grandparents remodeled it for him, they left that picture up. At this point, I did get a little hesitant because he had a deer head mounted on the wall. I was a big fan of Evil Dead 2, and I knew if ghostly shenanigans were afoot, that thing was going to maniacally laugh at some point in the night, right? It didn't, though, and I slept soundly through the night and never saw or heard anything else. I've been to that house countless times since then and never seen or heard anything else. I've never seen another apparition anywhere that I know of, so that's my really unexplained event. I've told people I know countless times, but I've never really shared it like this online. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's something that has always stuck with me, and if anyone else has any thoughts or even similar experiences, then honestly, I would love to hear them. So last night, my girlfriend and I were laying in bed. We were both wide awake, chatting, when finally I turned the light off and rolled over to go to sleep. My dog, a German Shepherd, was laying on the floor right next to my side of the bed. A second after I rolled over, though, I heard a crystal clear whisper right in my ear coming from the direction of my girlfriend. Not even half a second later, my dog spooks and starts barking at full volume at something in the room. It was the protector bark that she was clearly spooked as well. I honestly thought that my girlfriend whispered something to me, which set the dog off. So I rolled over and my girlfriend asked me if I heard the whisper too, because apparently she didn't say anything. The whisper sounded female and was very fast, so I couldn't make out what it said, but it was right in my ear and right in my girlfriend's ear apparently as well. For what it's worth as well, all windows were closed, our phones were in sleep mode, the neighbor's wall behind us is decently insulated, and the whole house was closed down and locked up for the night. We also just moved into this townhouse maybe 3 weeks ago. There aren't any pipes that run in the wall behind the bed, and the house was built in 1971. I did a sweep of the whole house afterwards, and as far as I could tell, everything was normal. I don't know what happened that night, but something tells me that there's something wrong with this place. What do you think I should do about it? So my grandma claims that she encountered 3 black-eyed kids. Apparently they asked her if they could come in. We have a garden with a balcony door which leads into the living room. They didn't look directly at her, and they sort of stared at the floor at first. One of them asked her if they could use her phone to call their parents, and my grandma told me that she never felt such a dread but thought really nothing of it because, they were kids, right? She said yes in the end and let them in, and she told me that they finally looked at her with eyes that were so black that she'd never seen something like this ever in her life. She froze and just sort of watched them walk into our hallway, out of sight. Then my grandma followed after a second or two, and they were gone. They simply vanished into thin air. Now, she was genuinely scared and confused when she told me this. My grandmother, mind you, would never make up such things like this, or even talk about the paranormal in general, let alone having access to the internet and these types of stories, because she simply just doesn't understand how all of this works. Never really even used a computer in her life. She's a Turkish grandma from an older generation. I googled though and froze after reading about this phenomena. This happened about 7 years ago now, and the story always startles me every time I think about it. And honestly, I feel really sorry for my grandma because she's been really impacted by this in a negative way. This story happened last June or July. But my family would always spend about a week up north around the same time every year, until just recently. My brother and I are getting older and schedules are getting in the way more frequently. We spend time at a bunch of different campgrounds in that time though, but each one we were always supplied with a cabin, rather than tents because Mum and I just aren't into that sort of nature, I guess. Anyways, we would be up there with a bunch of family members and we'd always have a good time. One of the first few days that we were up there, my immediate family was all sat down in the kitchen, enjoying breakfast when the topic of ghosts came up. Now, I've grown up believing in ghosts because of how prevalent they are in my family. I lived in a haunted place growing up. Parents have had strange encounters when they shared an apartment, etc. So this topic wasn't super unusual and always resulted in hearing some of the craziest ghost stories that we have. One of which was about my godmother's brother, or father. I'm not super sure actually, but I'll refer to him as Pete. So our family tends to have a lot of weird encounters involving family members or people that aren't strangers, so again, was super normal to talk about this topic at that time. For context, Pete lived a not so great life, I guess. Was very angry as well and sad, and that resulted in him taking his own life in his house. Now, the rest of this story is a bit fuzzy to me, but I'll tell what I know. So my godmother lived in this house for a while, and my parents, specifically my mum, would come and visit her. She said the energy in that house was always awful, especially by or in the walk-in pantry where he took his life. Pete was a very angry spirit, frequently pushing things around, dragging things across the living room and leaving a mess, etc. My parents made sure to tell him that he was not welcome. Fast forward a bit to when I was born. My godmother was a major part of my life. She helped babysit me when I was younger. She also babysat my own mum, and generally she was amazing with kids. She unfortunately passed away around 6 years ago now, and I miss her a lot. But my mum says that Pete used to follow her around and mess with things even when she moved, and that my mum had noticed that Pete was following her too. It wasn't as dramatic as the house, but little pieces of him seemed to sort of follow them around, I guess. Back to the cabin though. My parents told my brother, sister and I these 3 stories, which we'd heard before, and I remember me telling Pete off rudely at one point. Note too, don't be mean to ghosts, especially ones that are already mean. But we kept talking about the topic, and suddenly my left ear goes completely deaf, and my right ear starts very loudly ringing. I will say that I do get ringing in my ears sometimes, like most people do, right? But never in my life have I ever had an ear go completely deaf like this. The ringing got louder in my right ear, and then I heard a voice coming from right over my shoulder. It said Nana, with a deep, almost growl to it. Nana is what we called my godmother, by the way. I remember turning my head in confusion at hearing the voice. Then my left ear came back, and my right ear got extremely hot. I remember I wasn't really scared in the moment because of how normalized ghosts are to me, but it definitely freaked me out a bit later with all of the context. I told everyone at the table what happened, and nobody seemed to be fazed by it, which I know sounds weird, but again, we've been dealing with stuff like this for what seems like forever. But this is still one of my favorite paranormal stories to tell, and I wanted to ask all of you guys, what do you think it could have actually been? Skeptics and spiritual people are both welcome to comment, by the way, because I would honestly like to hear both sides. To give you some context, I come from a Mexican-American background. Although I was born in the United States, my parents were born in Mexico and spent most of their early years there as well. My mother also grew up in the Mexican countryside on a ranch where houses were scattered very far apart, and nighttime brought a pitch-black darkness that is hard to explain due to the absence of streetlights. Now one day, she was walking to a party with her brother and sister in the early afternoon when it wasn't as dark yet. As they made their way through the remote area, my mum happened to glance up at the sky and noticed a mysterious light moving about. She kept this sighting to herself, knowing all too well that it was rumored to be a witch, a common belief in many parts of Mexico. They get to the party and enjoyed the party, momentarily forgetting about the odd sight. However, when the party ended around midnight, they began their journey back home through the now pitch-black countryside, and halfway there, the inexplicable light appeared in the sky once more, and this time her siblings also saw it too. They continued walking in silence, not daring to mention the eerie sight to one another, when then, out of the blue, my mum tripped and turned to look behind her, catching a fleeting glimpse of a mysterious lady that apparently had been stalking them. Almost instantaneously, the figure then seemed to transform into a glowing light and descended into the sky, all of this happening in a matter of seconds. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched and followed after that for quite some time too. This is a story that my mother has told me over the years quite often, and I guess it's because it's something that just never really sat with her in the right way. This happened last week, and while she didn't seem malicious, the things that she said were definitely creepy. So I, a 19-year-old male, was going home to university, and to get home I have to use the train. As I got on, a lot of the seats were occupied. In my country, the seats are put in a way so that 4 people can talk and sit in front of each other, and they were kind of close, perfect for talking, even with strangers, sadly. But I see that there is a few spaces in front of this girl, who seemed about 1 or 2 years younger than me, but you never know, I guess. In any case, I go there and I ask her if I can sit down. Of course, she replied, and sort of looked at me in a strange, intense way. I pulled out my phone to distract myself from her. She also had a chocolate in her hand. That's going to be important for later, by the way. But she asked me, where do I live? And I was like, why do you have to know? She then asked when I'm going to get off the train. I told her the place, and she told me that she's getting off the next one. She then started singing, then said, "Oh, sometimes I sing. I'm just a silly girl." Then did it again. Whenever she said something, she sort of looked at me like she was waiting for a response, so I replied, "It's okay to be silly if you want," because I just didn't want to talk to her. Then she told me that, "You're pretty." And when I asked, "What do you mean?" she asked if she's pretty. In my language, the second one is an extension of the first, so it seemed like she sort of corrected herself, I guess. Then she asked if she had chocolate on her face. She did. I also got the chocolate that she had offered to me, but I declined. She also told me about her piercing that came off, and she put it on in the middle of the train, apparently. I told her that she could get it fixed where she got it, and she said in German, "Will you go there with me?" Obviously, I told her no. While she tried to get her piercing back in, her mouth piercing, that is, she then said that she was in love with me. I told her that I have a girlfriend. I don't, but the university I attend has much prettier girls than her, let me tell you, and that the piercing is too much for me. And she told me that she'll beat my girlfriend. She then said, "I love you," and started escalating into, "I'm going to kidnap you, and I'm going to strip you for me." She then asked if I would go with her and if she could go home with me. Then, when the train arrived at my destination, she asked me, "Are you going now, love?" I told her yes, and I just went on my way, confused and not knowing what the heck was going on. Luckily, she didn't follow me home, which I was really grateful for. She also asked me when we're going to meet again, and honestly, hopefully never. This happened years ago now, but I still think about it pretty often. My 3 little sisters, their dad and I, were standing in the checkout line at the grocery store. My younger sister couldn't have been older than like a year, so I was 10 and holding her on my hip. A middle-aged woman joined the line behind us. She was trying to get my baby sister's attention over my shoulder, just sort of cooing and baby talking to her. I figured her an obvious baby lover, so I turned us towards her slightly as a polite gesture, only for her to start moving closer and holding out her hands. It was all happening so fast, I almost couldn't react, but I had just enough time to give her a panicked look as she reached out to take her from me, and I shouted, "Excuse me, don't touch her, get away from us." The way she approached us, it was like she wanted to take her almost, or take her somewhere. At the same time, my stepdad took a step in between us and this crazy woman, asking her what she thinks she was doing. She just got really sheepish all of a sudden and tried to laugh it off almost. Instead of backing up though, she made her way past us and then proceeded to try and cut us in line. I think my stepdad would have exploded if not for the cashier giving this lady a glare and waving us forward. She left us alone after that, and it was super awkward. But the whole experience left us all quite shaken. The woman gave me a really off vibe from the start, and I'm really not sure what her intentions were. I think she probably just thought that I would allow her to hold my sister for some insane reason, like give over a baby to a stranger, but who knows. In any case, it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. So I'm 19, engaged, and have 2 kids of my own. Me, my fiancé, and our kids are currently living with her parents as we can't really afford a place of our own right now. About a year ago, her sister as well as her 4 kids and husband also lived with us. They honestly are not at all the greatest parents. I mean, they let their kids get away with anything pretty much, but when they started living here, they changed because none of us were going to be that way with them. I've been with my fiancée for 4 years now, and her nieces and nephews know me very well. They also refer to me as uncle at times. Their oldest daughter, 4 but was 3 at the time, has always been a bit of a troublemaker, and she still kind of is, I guess. But there came a period of time when they lived with us that she was just awful, like crazy aggressive and super defiant. I'm not saying that she was or is possessed, but I do believe that at that time something was affecting her behavior negatively. A few other things were happening at that time too. Our youngest daughter was still in a crib at the time and slept in our room. I know that a sign of spirits or entities is cold spots, right? Well, her crib always seemed to be super cold, as well as the area around it in comparison to the rest of the room. She also had a period of time where she kept seemingly waking up in the middle of the night for no reason. It almost seemed like, in a way, somebody or something was annoying her or trying to play with her. My niece also kept talking about seeing a huge, large man in the corner at night. Keep in mind, though, that there is no furniture or toys or anything should possibly mistake for a person like that. She would wake up screaming, though, and terrified, refusing to go back into the bedroom, and she'd just point to the corner. Then her father spoke up and claimed to have seen a shadow figure multiple times in her bedroom too. He tried to claim that it was possibly his grandfather that had recently passed away. I didn't say anything, but I knew that that couldn't be true, mainly because shadow figures are often non-human entities, not friendly human spirits. And I personally also had one experience as well. One night I fell asleep on the couch in the basement, which isn't far from the kids' bedroom. I woke up seeing a young boy dressed in beaten and old clothes, almost as if he was homeless. He was maybe only a couple of centimeters away from my face at that point, but when I blinked, he was gone. Our oldest also randomly started saying that she was seeing monsters at night, which she'd never said before. Me and my fiancé are not at all religious, but thought that we'd give holy water a shot. And amazingly, it seemed to have stopped things and nobody has seen anything since. They've also moved out since then and have been on their own for about 8 months now. But what do you think? Spirits, coincidence, or maybe just a kid's imagination? So I work at a mediocre hotel in a random town in Ohio. It's not beautiful or historical or massive or anything. In fact, there's really not anything special about it. But my co-workers joke around about it being haunted because there's one room people just get weird vibes in, and the old elevator most housekeepers use opens and closes slowly on its own at random times when nobody is on it. I personally have experienced some weird things that have convinced me the hotel definitely has something weird going on inside of it. I haven't told my co-workers these stories, but I'm sure some of them know a few themselves already. My most unexplainable story that I really haven't shared yet took place in room 217. So I was in this person's room tidying things up while they were away at a meeting or whatever, and I just instantly knew that something was off. I thought that I was just uncomfortable because the temperature was set at 90 degrees, but maybe it was something else. Whatever the case, after I made sure that there was no one in the room, I started making the bed. When that was done, I walked into the bathroom and bent down over the tub to grab the used washcloths. As I'm bent down, that's when an old lady said, "Thank you," clear as day, like she was right beside me. She had a couple of more words after that, still clear as day, but for some reason, and without looking behind me, I walked right out of that room expecting to see an older woman standing in the doorway. Maybe she was thanking me for cleaning her room, but didn't want to come in all the way. But no, there was absolutely nobody there. Maybe she's in the hallway. No one there either. I got spooked instantly, and I ran into the nearest housekeeping closet after that. I've gone over all the possibilities, like maybe the TV, but no, the TV was on mute and it was a man talking about the weather. Maybe it came from another room. No, there either. I just went in all of these rooms and everyone is away for the meeting. Did something play on my headphones? I wasn't wearing my headphones. None of it made sense, and I refused to go back into that room after that. Another thing that messes with my head is that many people have died in this hotel over the years. I had 2 people overdose in a room I was scheduled to clean that day, and I know that there's been more cases, and I just wasn't in the room to hear about it. Weird thing is that I never saw the cops show up, never heard any firemen, so what actually happened to the bodies? It's a little bit unsettling to think about, I guess. There's this college across the street that does events here multiple times a year as well. Apparently, at almost every event, one of the college freshman kids go missing as well. This latest one was last seen exiting the building through the main lobby, with nothing with him and getting into a car. And he, still to this day, hasn't been found. He left all of his stuff in his room and didn't take his phone with him or anything. It's all just really unsettling, and I don't know what to make of any of it. Okay, so let me start by saying that I've never really been sure in the afterlife. I'm one of those I have to see it to believe it kind of people. But my parents tell me that when I was really young, I apparently used to see ghosts. They say that at one point, I got so scared that I asked all the ghosts to go away until I was 30. I don't really remember any of this, so I always assumed that I just had a vivid imagination or whatever. But apparently it worked and they stopped showing up immediately, according to my parents anyway. Well, I turned 30 last year at about 6 months into the year, and they came back. Well, one did at least. I couldn't sleep, I was just laying there awake, and I figured that I'd get up and walk around the house a little bit. And you know when you get that feeling that someone is standing right behind you? I had it so strongly, and I just assumed it must be my roommate behind me. I think I felt the floorboards move a little, and that's how I knew that someone was there, so I turned around fully expecting to be my roommate there, but it wasn't. It was this shadow in the shape of a person, like a person just made of darkness. They were about a foot shorter than me, and they looked pretty large in weight. I just stood there, looking at them kind of dumbfounded. I remember saying, "Oh my God," and I guessed that they were looking at me because they paused for a moment, then they walked around me. I turned as they walked around me and watched them head towards the stove. Once they got to the stove, they vanished into thin air. I couldn't go to bed after that. I spent the rest of the night wide awake just thinking about what I had just seen. But it's hard to believe that after all these years, I finally know the truth. Ghosts are real. Maybe an afterlife is even real. You think that I would be scared, but I'm actually kind of excited. I kind of want to see more of them, and I sort of hope that they show up again soon. I guess I've always been a bit of a weirdo that way. I've never been afraid of the dark or typical things that other people are afraid of. I wonder if I'm supposed to be a medium or something. Does anyone have any tips on how to pursue this further and strengthen this ability if that's what it is? Also, has anyone else seen one? Did they look like a shadow person to you too? What did you do about it? And what should I do? So it's 2012. I had just graduated high school and my brother moved from Florida to Maryland to maintain foreclosures in the Maryland and DC area. I spent my 2 summers between college to work for him, giving him a little break, running his crew around, moving, changing locks, cleaning the house, and taking pictures, etc. Our routes sent us around DC, and he often put together the morning of early and then browsed Daily Mail and other articles. He somehow stumbled across an article about how the movie Exorcist was inspired by this property in DC on Bunker Hill Road, which we just so happened to maintain one of the neighbors' properties. Now, that day it was my brother and myself, and we decided that we would stop by where the old 3-story house once stood. To be honest, I don't know what was there. I knew of the movie of The Exorcist, but never been in scary movies, so didn't really know much about it, I guess. Well, the house where the 14-year-old boy lived in 1949, where The Exorcist was performed, was no longer there. Today it's a normal-looking historic street with older homes and this vacant lot with some trees and nice grass and all that. It's now a park and even has signs about no entry between dusk to dawn. On the property where the house sat is a pavilion for the public shaped in a sort of octagon. If I remember, maybe raised 3 feet off the ground with a sort of wraparound ramp. Around the ramp were bushes that circle the pavilion. So we decided to walk up there. It was quiet and nothing seemed eerie or strange as we walked up to the ramp. But this was about where it gets odd. So we walk up the ramp and to the center of the pavilion, and not until we actually are in the pavilion, nearly dead center, was when we heard buzzing. Not just like a little fly or a bee flying, but hundreds of insects, which we assumed were flies, began to buzz all in unison from around the entire pavilion. It was very loud and noticeably a swarm in the bushes. They didn't seem to fly around either, so we just stood there and looked around, then at each other, and we were kind of shocked, and we didn't stay after that. Bugs are totally normal, I get that, but I don't get why they didn't make a sound as we walked up the ramp or around the pavilion as we were so close to the bushes. And I mean, heck, I've maintained several properties and never experienced anything like that in Mother Nature, or anywhere for that matter. Those summers I experienced ground bees to spiders to voodoo in basements, books on spells and witchcraft, glass orbs, crystal balls, trap houses. I mean, we even explored the haunted abandoned insane asylum up there, but something about that moment, it just doesn't sit right with me, and it still freaks me out. I mean, it was an insanely loud buzz, like nothing I'd ever heard before, and really, it must have been an absolute mountain of insects to make that sort of noise. And with the amount of insects that were around, that just didn't make any sense. So when I was 10 to 12, 1992 to 94, myself along with my brother, mother and aunt all moved into a nice house on the south side of St. Louis. It was your basic layout with houses 20 feet apart and built in the 40s and 50s. It was a nice 4-bedroom, and I remember my mum saying how cheap it was. Immediately though, after moving in, all this weird stuff started happening. Everything from doors slamming, footsteps upstairs when nobody was up there, the TV would change channels by itself, etc. It was annoying stuff, but nothing my 10-year-old self couldn't get used to. After a few months, we also noticed things were getting a bit weirder. The sinks in the basement used to spew black goo out of the drains, and the same goo would run down the walls through the house. But what made it worse was that it sort of smelled like sulfur. The basement was a scary place too. I never felt right being down there. My brother, who was 2 years older than I was, begged me to sleep in his room with him down there because he would say something would keep waking him up at around like 3:04 in the morning every night, and allegedly it was really scaring him. Now, my brother normally wanted nothing to do with me. We were always fighting and making fun of each other, so for him to ask this was a pretty big deal in my mind. I remember one night we sat up all night waiting for 3:04 and nothing happened. Maybe I don't remember, or because we were awake, it just didn't show itself. In any case, in the backyard, I remember the soil looked silver almost. I still have no idea why or how it was this color, but my brother used to say that it was ground up tombstones. So many different crazy things happen in this house, and I could go on forever about it, but eventually one day I was walking home from school, and when I got there, my mum was sitting outside in the car with all of our belongings in trash bags. She said to me to get into the car and that we were moving right now. Whatever happened to her, she never really said, but over the years she had told me things like her and my aunt covered the upstairs with flour once and immediately saw bare footprints. The remote control came up off the table once into the air and was thrown at her, and even hit her in the face. My bed once flung across my room, and my toys were always all over the upstairs when I wouldn't be home, and I would have to explain to her that I always put them back before I left, so I didn't throw them around. After we moved out and moved in with my grandma, I'd never experienced anything since then. A few years ago, though, I was up in the city around my old neighborhood and drove down the street, and to my surprise, the house was gone. Like, there was a large concrete slab there where the house used to be. Now, this was a city street, so the missing out was pretty obvious, but even Google Maps shows an empty lot with the address number still attached to it. I often wonder what actually happened to it. I personally think it was like the end of Poltergeist, and it was sucked into another dimension or something, maybe. Well, that's what I like to think anyway. I wish I had the resources to look into what happened, but I've never been able to find any public records or anything of the demolition. Most people just think that I'm crazy when I tell them about this, but I know that it wasn't just my childhood imagination, especially because everyone in the house also witnessed all of the same experiences. This is a small summary of the environment where the experience happened, just for context. I grew up with toxic parents, and I developed depression through the years and cried a lot in the corner of my room. I attempted self-deletion twice there too. I shared my room with my younger sister, who was badly abused by my mother. A lot of crying happened in that room from her side as well. This is to say that it was a very negative era in our lives, and during that time, I had multiple sleep paralysis episodes, and also believed that I experienced astral projection, even though at the time I thought that a spirit was trying to pull me out of my body. So, the story started when my younger sister went to visit my cousin, and my cousin told her that she was possessed by a demon, and showed her what the demon told her to do. It was a ritual to break up a couple in the neighborhood, among other things that included a mirror and smoke, etc. And her mother was moving from one psychiatrist to another to try to explain her behavior and treat her. The conclusion was that my cousin was schizophrenic because she saw and talked to someone that didn't exist. Just as a side note too, our family is the type of family that even if they did witness a demon face to face, they wouldn't believe it, and would try to get a medical or scientific explanation to it all. Anyway, my sister, 15 and female at the time, comes back from visiting my cousin terrified and told me, 22-year-old female at the time, all about what happened, and I'm like, okay, that's bull, but I listen to her and comfort her as much as I can. She swears that she felt a spirit during the rituals though, and I brushed it off saying that it was just psychological and my cousin is probably crazy and is seeing a doctor for that. Moving forward, my sister becomes convinced though that she is possessed by a spirit. She tells me that the spirit tells her things to help her, warn her about things and guide her. She starts not eating as much as she was and starts avoiding the bath. And after a while, the whole room starts smelling like rotten flesh. I would push her into the bathroom and force her to take a bath every week or so and deep clean the room every week, moving furniture, scrubbing walls, and the smell was only getting worse. and it was mostly coming from her side of the room. I was convinced that her hormones and the lack of showers were the reasons, so I was making sure to shove her into the bathroom at least twice a week at this point, deep clean the room and provide all kind of deodorants and perfumes to her. The smell, though, was getting worse, and her behavior was getting worse too. Weirdly enough, too, she would know when my father would come home exactly by the minute. She would know as if it was a pop quiz. She would know where someone was going and why, and she would be able to talk pretty much anyone into doing whatever she wanted. There were a lot of weird things too, like she would always wake up tired, having the deepest black eyes and a lot of bruises as well. We ran all kind of blood work on her to fix it, but it all came back normal. She would find dead rats in her purse and other weird things too. So now to the experience. That night, my sister, little sister, aged 5 at the time, came to sleep with us in our room, and I was in the living room studying until really late. By 2 a.m. or so, I decided to go to sleep, and I just had this weird feeling that I should avoid my room and that I should just stay away, but I brushed it off. I went to my room, and when I opened the door, it smelled horrible, like something had died in there. And there was no air, like it was hard to breathe. I opened the window to let some air in, but I felt no change. I stuck my nose in the window to breathe some fresh air, but there really was none. I decided to sleep anyway, and my body was screaming at me to leave the room. I grabbed my pillow and was going to the living room, and then I thought, no, spirits and ghosts are not real. This is all my little sister being terrified. The smell must be from the furniture being damp, and we just need to replace it and just figure it out in the morning. So in the end, I turned around and I stayed. I felt the air become very heavy when I laid down. I moved, and all of a sudden, it's hard to explain, but I felt like my hands were not mine. So I touched my body, and I felt as if something or someone else was touching me. It was freaky, and I opened my eyes, and it was then that I saw this giant black figure standing right at the end of my bed. It was so big and so black, like no light could be shed on it. I blinked, and it didn't go away. I was like, okay, I'm very tired from not sleeping enough. This must all be in my head. So I turned my back to it, and I tried to get some sleep. Now, I was sleeping eventually when I transitioned into what I believe was a dream. I woke up and the demon was there, very black, and an evil feeling was coming out of it. I ran to wake my sister, but the demon blocked me. So I ran to the door to find my mother, and I knocked on her door until she opened. I told her about what was going on, and she didn't care, and the demon was coming after me, so I ran to the bathroom to hide. And there I saw a flame in the mirror, so I ran back to my room, but I couldn't open the door anymore, so I just kept banging on it until I forced it open. And then my night lamp exploded, and I woke up. When I woke up, I was obviously terrified, but the room just didn't smell as bad as before, at least as bad as when I went to sleep. And there was more light in the room instead of the pitch black before. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I stayed awake all night until the morning when everybody woke up, and I noticed that my sister was barely walking. She said that she was extremely tired and was bruised more than usual. I also noticed that the room door wouldn't close anymore. It had moved horizontally, and somehow it didn't fit the door frame anymore or something, and nobody knows why. My lamp, it had actually exploded, and my curtains were on the floor, and I noticed that they were pulled from the wall as if somebody had used a hammer to knock the hanging rods off. It was very weird, but I kept saying to myself that everything must have an explanation, until I went to have my breakfast. My 5-year-old sister said that she saw me and said, "Hey sis, there was a fairy just messing with your tummy and playing with it like with Play-Doh." I asked what fairy and what she meant, and she said, the flying black fairy. He is a fairy because he can fly. I asked her to describe the fairy, and she said that it was scary, so when she saw it, she just closed her eyes and started praying to God. More things happened afterward, like knocking on the walls, someone choking my mother for a few seconds. She was speaking about it randomly at dinner. My sister got even weirder until I moved out. I heard that my cousin, who was diagnosed schizophrenic at the age of 19, actually had a religious exorcism performed on her, and that afterward she wasn't seeing anything weird or talking to any invisible beings anymore. Her psychiatrist couldn't keep her on medication and said that she was spontaneously cured from schizophrenia afterward, after less than 2 years of being diagnosed. My cousin reached out to my sister and took her to the same exorcist, and now she's also fine too. The smell left the house, and we just never really talked about what happened. The house was blessed, and that was it. Like I said, we're not a religious family by any means, but it was like trying everything just for the sake of it, and I'm still a bit of an agnostic, I admit, but the experience definitely changed and shaped me. My mother talked about things that she experienced in that house too, but we never shared our experiences with her because, to be honest, I just don't think that she would believe us. Anyway, I would love to get your thoughts on what you think it was. Was it demonic? Was it a ghost? Was it nothing at all, and was it all in our heads? I would really like to get your opinions. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with my family just to make sure that I have the details correct. This was in the mid-80s. I was about 7, at home with my 2 older sisters, 8 and 11-ish, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister, 11, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to have the picture of what our house looked like to understand what happened too. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house and we just kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking and what sounded like rocks being dropped down from the downspouts or something. And you know kids, right? We thought of a squirrel or something, but it just kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe somebody climbed the huge tree beside the house and got on the roof. We were all scared because we knew that there was roof access, a point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters, and what if he could get inside? My older sister told my other sister and one of my other cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back look up and see if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls, both 8 years old, walk about halfway across the parking lot and, being curious kids, turn around, looked up, and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s sort of crop top football jerseys. Think Johnny Depp in Nightmare on Elm Street. And he was crouched down on the roof just staring. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy. My older sister, freaking out too, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on the roof, but couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up, but when they got there, I don't think that they believed a word that we said. They thought a bunch of little kids were making up this story for attention, but one cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away, to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't really see a person if they were laying down. Then these cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared out of our minds, crying to look for this guy, knowing about the roof access. We all cried, not wanting to go, but they said that we had to. To this day, I remember how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't even check out the house, inside or out, and left. We were so scared to be left home with this guy out there. I mean, who knows where he was at this point. We didn't know if he was laying down on the roof or jumped down or somehow got in and was hiding. My mum finally got home a few hours later and we told her what happened immediately, and my mum explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access and that nobody could get in, but she checked anyways. She went out to check on the outside roof, and there were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off the roof onto the porch and off into the flower bed. My mum was absolutely steaming mad when she realized that we had told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day and we were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mum went up one side of the cops and down the other, and we never found out who the guy was or why he was there. Did he know that it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? I'm not sure, but it's definitely freaky to think about. I'm currently 33, a male, and my first experience that I had in this place was I was 13 and my grandparents on my dad's side of the family mowing. My grandpa had quite a large shed that he woodworked in and had recently put in a massive window facing the house. The window itself was around maybe 3 foot wide and 7 foot tall. As I'm mowing the grass sometime in the afternoon, I see a tall, slender female from the floor to just the top of the window. She was all white and had the darkest eyes that I'd ever seen. No eyeballs, it seemed. The whole area where her eyes would be were just black. I stopped and we looked at each other, I think, for maybe a solid 3 to 5 seconds. I blink and she's gone. The second thing that happened was when I was 15. I opted for a futon instead of a normal mattress around the age of 12, so handrails and all this thing laid out bed style is maybe, I don't know, like 1.5 to 2 foot tall. I turned everything off and I laid down for bed. Maybe 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like something flicking random things from one end of the room to the other. At the time, I had an old 24-inch box-style TV. The last flick sounded like it was dead center of the screen. Anyone older will know that it's a very distinct sound when something hits the glass on the older TV like that. I heard the flick to the screen and my dark room all of a sudden lit up with static from the TV. But whatever it was, it had managed to turn the TV on with the flick. I uncovered, turned the TV off again, and I went to sleep. Now, maybe a couple of weeks after the prior experience, I wake up to a light in my room, and at the time, and I still do, I slept in a really blacked out room. No lights, and I used thick plastic shower curtains on my windows to keep the light out. But clearly, there shouldn't be any lights, so I uncover to see what's on. And there is a kid. I say kid because of my futon dimensions, and he is just like the old woman. All white, black eyes, and standing maybe 1 foot taller than my handrail, at the end of my bed, by my feet. We stare at each other for what felt like a solid minute, and then he slowly faded away and it was dark again in my room. My grandma on my dad's side was always very spiritual, had sage and such hung on walls. I talked to her about said experiences, and I don't know if she was just trying to calm me down about it or what, but she told me that white spirits are good spirits. I should avoid them, but I shouldn't be scared. She had since split up with my grandpa and was living on her own. So the next experience, I'm 16, staying the night at my grandma's. It was later in the evening, so 10 to 12-ish. We had both gone to bed before this. I wake up hearing snoring from the end of the hall. She was asleep and I had to use the restroom. As I'm walking down the hall, I pass the spare room and the same woman from Experience 1 is sitting on the end of the bed, head turned, staring at me. the whole room was lit up too. Now, I looked over my left. I saw said apparition and freaked. But that room was supposed to be empty, and I wasn't expecting to be looking at anything in there. I ran, of course, maybe 5 foot down the hall, then sort of backpedaled, took a look, and by then she was gone. I did not and have not told my grandma about this woman. I believe that whoever she is perhaps watching over her or something, guarding my grandma. Same as before, there were no bad vibes, but being scared was from not expecting it, I guess. But then there was the next experience. Other than random noises and yells of my name over the years, nothing really significant has happened. I'm now 27, married with kids and working night shifts. My family had gone to sleep at around 9:30 to 10. At about 1 or 2 in the morning, I'm doing laundry, when suddenly there is a loud scratching and beating in the door to the laundry room. I got up to investigate, but there was nothing amiss. I left the door open just in case. I walked back to the couch and sat down. Not even seconds later, the door just absolutely slams shut, and the beating on it continues. I've told my wife of all the noises and experiences beforehand, and she said that she had never had anything happen to her. So I assumed that I'm the only one hearing this, and checked how much time was left on the dryer, set an alarm, and I just left the house. Yeah, I'm that guy. Me and my wife joke about it nowadays, but yeah, we have since bought a house and gotten a dog, and I've become accustomed to hearing noises and looking at the dog to see if she acknowledged it as well. Sometimes no, but most of the time she will completely perk up. Ears, hair on end, and whole 9 yards in whatever direction said noise came from. We have a spare room that nobody goes in. Absolutely creepy vibes from all family members involved. Even the guests have said that they can't sleep in there, and have moved to the couch in the middle of the night. Only when I'm home alone do I hear the noises. But on a couple of occasions, I hear what sounds like a 5-year-old girl laughing from our kitchen. The dog has acknowledged this both times as well, and that always has made me feel really weird. Now, here is how I came to the solution to my problem with my house. It was during a family visit at Easter or something at my mum's. I went to my old room, shut the door, and I spoke out loud. I said, "Hey ghost kid, if you're still here, I could use your help at my house. You've never given me feelings of harm, and my house currently does. If you're still here, could you come with me and do your best?" It's been 2 years. Occasionally, I feel a bit of a catch of a glimpse of a kid ghost from my youth in the very corner of my eye, like peeking around a corner of something. But all noises, laughter, and all the bad vibes have since left. That's all of my experiences up until this day, and I just wanted to share it and get it off my chest. Maybe somebody else has encountered a white ghost with black holes where their eyes should be like I have. I don't know, but I sound crazy, I know that, but I swear that all of this is the truth. About 10 years ago, I moved into a loft apartment into a building which had formerly been a Catholic school. The stone entryways on either side of the building, they still read boys and girls as it had been co-ed but gender separated. When I first moved in, it was extremely pleasant there, a very positive, homey feeling. My apartment had formerly been a classroom with windows all along the exterior wall, and was always well lit by either the sun or the streetlights. My dad, he lived nearby, and I visited him at least once a week. At the time, he was doing a PhD in metaphysics and had become increasingly interested in the paranormal. Tarot, shamanism, witchcraft, meditation, star charts, Reiki, etc. And I knew that he was practicing this in his home as well. I honestly thought that it was cool, and before moving into the apartment that I had lived with him for a couple of months, I was rarely uncomfortable or afraid. About 2 months after I had moved into the new apartment, the tone of it just seemed to change all of a sudden. It wasn't really negative, and I struggled to describe what felt different, but the best that I can get to is that the former felt light and feminine, while the latter was harder and more masculine. I just figured at the time that the honeymoon period was over. It steadily got stranger, however, and I began to feel that I was never alone in the apartment. It didn't feel frightening, more sad and awkward, I guess. It was at first only in my apartment, but then I started to feel it as soon as I entered the building, like it had seen me coming and waited at the door for me. It progressed to my cat noticing something too, and refusing to go near the entryway to my bathroom. In fact, she would often go towards the kitchen and meow like somebody was there. At night, she would go berserk as if being chased. She often ended up on a narrow ledge above my bed, but only during this time. I just chalked this all up to cat weirdness. I mean, those little guys do crazy things, right? But then I started to feel it too. The bathroom felt strange. Sad, like deep regret. I started avoiding the bathroom too, taking the fastest showers that I could and hurrying through my morning routine. Since it was a loft apartment, the bedroom was raised above our feet off the main floor and separated from the main room by a tall partial wall. From my bed, I could see into the bathroom on the same raised level and down the short staircase partly into the kitchen. Often when I was in my bed, I would sense something move from the bathroom, down the stairs and into the kitchen. Sometimes I saw darkness out of the corner of my eye, sometimes I only felt it but couldn't see it. I assumed that I was just scaring myself because I disliked the bathroom, but hey, it was what it was. I finally told my dad about it though, expecting him to laugh, but he only replied nonchalantly that he'd had experience like that in his house before I moved in. His step-nephews had been visiting one night. Both were between 7 and 10 years old. While having dinner with them, one looked up past the kitchen and said that a big black mass was floating in the doorway. Nobody else could see it, but the boy wasn't afraid and said that it had disappeared. Dad said after I moved out that he stopped feeling whatever it was and seeing shadows and assumed that it was transient and had moved on. It did. It seemed to have moved in with me. Now, things got exponentially worse when my boyfriend came to visit for a week. I'd mentioned how I didn't feel alone in the apartment, but hadn't talked about the rest of it. And the first night that he was there, he woke me up to say that my cat was going crazy and had gotten up onto the ledge above the bed, but he hadn't seen her get up there, despite the fact that he could see the entire length of it, and the back wall of the ledge was 12 feet tall. She was just suddenly up there, which really didn't make sense. He was weirded out by it, but I told him cats often get the zoomies at night, and it was probably nothing. But the next day, I came home from work, and he was just shaken. He said that he'd been on his laptop on the couch and started to feel watched. Looking up, he saw a male figure staring at him from the kitchen. He said that it was like a shadow person, but fearing that it was an actual intruder, he ran towards it, only for it to disappear. I then came clean about everything that I'd experienced, and he got really upset that I hadn't told him. He started going to the library while I was at work to avoid being there alone, in fact. He often stayed up later, though, than I did, since I went to bed at about 9 to get up at 5 for work, and told me that he often saw shadows move from the bathroom down the stairs to the kitchen. He described them as small and close to the ground, like he was only seeing shadowy feet or something. His stay was extended out to a month, though, because I decided to move in with him, unrelated to the haunting, since he'd come to stay mostly to see if we could cohabitate well. The next week, before I moved, was definitely the worst by far, though. The apartment, it felt angry. While sitting on the bottom stair organizing books, my boyfriend, sitting facing me, trying to hand me things, I felt something walk by behind me, and whatever it was blocked the light as it passed by. I started to say something, and he said that the shadow man had walked by behind me from the bathroom in the direction of the bed. He was so disturbed by this that he actually teared up, saying that it hated him and blamed him that I was moving out. We decided to move me out a few days sooner, and we packed a little quicker. During this time, we didn't see anything else, though the apartment still felt charged and very unwelcoming. I figured that it would follow me to his apartment, but I haven't experienced anything that I couldn't explain since. I still have no idea what it was, why it followed me, or why it stayed in that apartment, but to be honest, I'm just glad to be free of it. When I was a teenager in the early 2000s, South London, there was a rumor in my high school that there was a naked man who looked like Father Christmas in the woods. We thought the story was funny and enjoyed it, but all secretly understood it to be an urban legend. Now, one day after school, me and my friends would go to the park about 5 minutes away from the school to play on the tire swing and make daisy chains, talk about boys and stuff. The park was on a seam of ancient woods, and it was more or less a rectangular shape with a large rectangular grass green in the middle surrounded by woodland on 3 sides. The grassy green had a children's playground on the right-hand side, butting up to the woodland on one side. The children's playground was large with an assortment of equipment for both younger and older children, and was gated off from the rest of the park by 2-meter-high metal railings. One summer's evening after school, though, we were hanging out in the children's park by the tire swing, as we usually did, when I noticed an unusual movement in the trees that bordered the other side of the metal railing. All I could see was a mixture of green and brown tones amidst the shadows of the in the woodland area, so I approached the metal railings of the children's park to get a better view. Now, the woodland had a kind of opening in it, at the center of which stood a large oak tree. Dappled light filtered through the canopy to the foot of the oak tree, forming a sort of natural stage before the audience of the children's playground. As my eyes began to focus, I realized that right in the middle of the stage was a young man, maybe about 30 years old, stood staring at us, a group of 3 teenage girls in their school uniforms. Our eyes transfixed for a moment before I looked down and screamed. My eyes locked on him in terror, but he did not avert his gaze. He stood there, watching us, while completely naked, playing with himself. My friends ran over to my side and followed my eye line. Horrified, they grabbed me, pulled me out of my shock and out of the park, and we ran home. This was just before the time when mobile phones were ubiquitous, so we didn't tell the police, and that was pretty much the end of the matter. But 20 years later, I always wonder if that man went on to do anything worse. There was another incident that happened a little while later, but I don't know if it was connected, but it was much, much worse than what we experienced. I was in my first semester of university. I just graduated college not too long ago and had entered into a program that, after a while, I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up into the large city in order to study what was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path for my life while simultaneously opening myself up to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but at that time, our schedules just wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and just walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences, though, and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help satiate my boredom and loneliness, I guess. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find that it takes a lot out of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before, don't get me wrong, from different classes in college, But ultimately, and I know this makes me a bit of a turd, but I would end up texting less and less until eventually either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy too, I really just don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, it's probably a terrible thing to say, but nonetheless, it's the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancé, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageways under the street that connects to the school's library. It's a building to the actual building that possesses classes. And as I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, 21, with a thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's one for my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish that I had simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied cordially. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like myself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a bit of a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus, and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it, and he said that he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa. They were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that we were discussing was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which was against what he had proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel with. That being said, though, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age who, after a bit of talking, I found out that we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as a leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multiple-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion as well as having made some new friends, I continued to attend this study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off though as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now a part of, provided me with exactly what I wanted. We even went to a church-run event together where I quit vaping, and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs, and all of my former spiritual experiences as well, and Joel exposed to me a story and a few incidences that, at that time, I definitely, certainly, should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where, when he was in prayer, he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more so of a metaphor or something, but he had reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved, I'll admit. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses, I was satisfied with who I was with and what we were doing together. Though I am not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, I suppose, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience talking with God in his head came off as uncomfortable to me. He also said that the way that he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what he meant by this. This, of course, though, was just the beginning. So after the summer had ended, I had found myself in the most religiously devoted state that I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which made me housebound for months, and I had to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester, relating to something that I had found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different though. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we can get on with our lesson, as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there was, as it required even more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person and showed that in this program, we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something, but be gaining. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were to continue with this program, that we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it, and I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of this group, who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was sort of off-putting, controlling, and a bit intrusive. But after our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded, I guess, by the intensity with which he gave his speech about this new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and we sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that, at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement, it really shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they had even mentioned it, and in the way that he described it, it sounded as if he was saying that he had some sort of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred, to say the least, though I felt like it was a bit impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that I, if I successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program that I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization apparently. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in the lesson, I felt overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and even had kids. He was actually just a part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that work on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I had first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions. and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization that he was a part of. In any case, it was at this point that school began to pick up a lot, and I was also working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen, so I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later, so yeah." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded by that question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that too. He knew that the area that I lived in was pretty remote and a fair distance away. I also told him that I had work, which he had plainly disregarded. So, "No man, unfortunately I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied. To which he said, "Come on man, just get off the train and come back." At this point, I was annoyed, I'll admit it. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no, and that I had work that day. So, in the end, I just didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancé, though, about how I was starting to feel about the whole ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancé told me, though, that by the way that Joel was acting, and with regards to the things that he said, that she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation too. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group, and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything that I wanted in a community, except for the fact that at the helm was a seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive being who was making me and possibly other members more miserable. I'll give you that one. But nevertheless, I was still a bit reluctant. Now, there was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from this group were going, I did intend to go, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way that I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyways, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was on Friday, I told him that I wasn't able to go because I had work. To this, he replied and simply said, "What? Bro, no way. You've got to come. Take work off and find somebody else to take your shift. God wants you there." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was his mouthpiece or something. I went on to text him again and informed him, "Sorry man, I cannot do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyways." To which he then again replied similarly to what he had before, and this was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries, as well as his attempt to command me, made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he was slowly but surely increasingly controlling me and trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he were the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him whether or not I had sex with my fiancé. He replied with a long paragraph, persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group and that it was God's will for me to show up to this event, even though I was completely unable. He was certain, though, that this group was meant for me and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length, repeating what he had just said. No matter what I would say, and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try and push me into submission when I had clearly said no. And at this point, I said to him that I did not want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up?" I want you to explain why you don't want to continue so that we can meet up and do that, and I can get a better sense and we can figure out what we can do from there. Even in this, I knew that he was trying to elongate his chance at bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said that I didn't want to, so he asked again, and I decided at that moment that I needed to block him, so I did. About a semester later, though, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joel walked over to me with one of his friends and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I sort of uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment, while Joel turned around to look at me and asked with this sort of disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me, man. That way we can meet up and talk, because I really want to know why you left the group." To which I evidently was frustrated, said okay, and went on my way. That night he texted me on Instagram insisting that we meet up again, and I've just blocked him there too. In short though, I'm thankful for my fiancée, who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm really not sure if I would have been strong enough to have left that group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in that group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for a charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs, and who seemed as if they were sort of emaciated, but they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. In the end, and after a lot of reflection, I truly believe that I was being indoctrinated into a cult. I don't know where it was going, I don't know what they had planned for the future, but it was most assuredly heading in that direction, and that is a frightening prospect. I guess the lesson here is beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody might seem nice to you does not mean that they might not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, then mean it. I personally really did not want to talk about this at first, because I've always thought people sound so crazy when they claim that they've seen ghosts. The more I experience too, the crazier I feel. I've been trying to rationalize things, but I've never dealt with anything like this before. So, I work in a large storeroom, main in a hospital from late evening until around 6 a.m. This supply room is located somewhere above the old morgue, of which the entrance has been bricked over. Not really relevant, but this kind of is crazy to me since I didn't have any experiences until I was made aware of this. I definitely don't seek things out or jump at every little thing. I actually wear earbuds and crank the volume to pretend that nothing is happening. But I will hear things fall, look and see that nothing actually fell off the shelves. And after my friends in security told me about the morgue, the lights would flicker in my department infrequently. I rationalized that this must be old wiring. When I made a supply delivery to the postpartum floor, the lights flickered once. This is in a wing very recently built. It is the only small supply room that I deliver to that I am almost always completely alone in while putting away supplies. Then at about maybe 3.5, 4 weeks ago, the lights flickered very hard in the main storeroom. As this happened, my phone screen flickered at the same time, and about a week later at maybe 2 a.m., I was holding paper up looking at items that I needed to pull for an order. And by the edge of the paper, across from the road that I was in, I swear to you that I saw a black face with white eyes peeking at me from around a shelf. It had a hand wrapped around the pole of the shelf, no different from a child peeking around a doorframe. When I cut my eyes over to get a better look, what I saw didn't vanish too. It more so pulled away, I guess, like it slipped back around the shelf. I rationalized and told myself that I must just be tired. In reality, I didn't feel tired at all, though. Last night, I know almost the exact same time, too, because I was so terrified I actually called my mum immediately. At about 1 a.m., I was pulling my last order for the night, ER, and I had just a few items left. Loudly, I heard supply items fall off the shelving on a different row. I ignored it and continued listening to a podcast, telling myself that if I didn't give it any attention that it will stop. After about 5 or 6 minutes, I was sitting down logging changes to my order, and I heard supplies fall from another row, this time louder than the first. I wanted to play it off, but my heart was racing at this point, so I called my mum and told her, "Hey, were you asleep? You're going to have to stay on the phone with me for at least a few minutes." This is at 1:09 in the morning. I didn't want to say out loud what was going on, but she picked up on it from my mentioning that it was from a week before. I told her that I was going to start making my deliveries to the floors, so once I got out of the storeroom, I would leave her alone so that she could sleep. I'm not religious, but she told me that I needed to pray when these things are happening. She asked if I was in a safe place, and I told her that I should be okay. I was taking my delivery to NICU and postpartum. I let her go as I felt that I would be fine. The delivery to the NICUs was pretty much as usual, but as soon as I took my cart into the postpartum supply room, I didn't even get to put one item away before the lights began flickering harder than I'd ever seen. I flew into a panic and immediately left the room to catch my breath. I've tried to ask the nurses at the station if they ever experienced the lights flickering in that room, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. I tell myself that this stuff isn't real or just explain it away, but I don't know. Am I crazy? If this is real, what could I be dealing with? What should I do? I've never seen or experienced anything like this in my life until now. And to be honest, I'm just a bit lost. For the last few months, I've been hearing noises and yelling in my house. The first incident happened when I was cleaning the kitchen. I heard my nickname called loudly in my dad's voice. My parents' room is a clear earshot away. I could look around a corner and see their bed. Sometimes he naps during the day, he works nights, but I knew for a fact that he wasn't home at that time. I still went to check anyway, and his bed was empty. No cars in the driveway, and it really freaked me out, but I just went about my day. The other few have all been very similar too. It's always my parents calling me, either at night when I'm alone or during the day when everybody is out. And the odd thing about it is that, while it sounds just like them, the nickname that is used isn't what they call me. It's what I'm known as by a bunch of other people outside my immediate family. It already creeps me out that I'm hearing my name called randomly, but the fact that it's not the right name is just creepy, right? This morning, too, I woke up to my name being shouted right in my ear, my full name, which, again, is rare for either of my parents to use. It was my dad's voice, and he sounded really angry. My immediate reaction was to jump up, but my door was closed, and again, I was home alone. Last night, I thought that I heard my 8-year-old brother screaming, but I checked on him, and he was fast asleep. My parents have confirmed that they hear us calling them too, but it's always a bit off as well. My brother just calls them Mum or Ma and Dad, and I rarely call them that and always use a nickname for each. The amount of times that my mum has come to my room wondering why I'm yelling for her when I'm doing homework is crazy. My dad said that when I went on vacation for a week that they heard me talking in my room, but it was always sort of unintelligible. Except I was 500 miles away, so that just doesn't make any sense. The most frustrating part about all of this, though, isn't the name calling. The most frustrating part about this, though, isn't even the name calling. It's the fact that talking about this stuff gives me migraines. I never acknowledge it when it happens or speak to whatever might be doing it, but if you don't physically go to check what you heard, then you just get these terrible headaches. It's like whatever it is begging for attention by impersonating us or something. It's something like I've never experienced, and I just wish that it would stop. So, I'm going to tell you the story of my brief encounter with a man called Happy. And even though it happened around 9 years ago, sometimes he still crosses my mind, especially on gloomy, overcast days in LA, just like the day that I met him. 2013. I'm working at a cannabis dispensary in Venice Beach, a block from the boardwalk. A good 35% of our patrons were unhoused people. Occasionally, someone experiencing severe psychosis would try to come in, but if they were screaming or unintelligible, security would just not let them in. If they had and presented the holy trinity of medical papers, ID and cash, they were good to go. We had a compassion program where we'd bag up grams of shake left over the bottoms of jars and give them completely free, one per person per day, to anyone who asked. Word about this spread quickly on the boardwalk. Generally, these people would be the nicest, most polite and considerate customers, even if they did smell a bit stinky and their money got pulled out of a sweaty sock or something. No one working there would bat an eye if somebody came in smelling like they'd slept on the beach for a week next to a bottle of vodka, as long as they just calmly buy their weed and they would be on their way like any other customer. So, it's a foggy, chilly day around the holidays, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone called out, so I was the only one in the back, bud tending. There was another employee at reception and the security guard at the front door. I'm alone in the back room. There are cameras, but no one is actively watching them. This guy walks in after getting checked in at the front, and he's the only customer at the moment. And I swear that the whole room gets colder as he walks in. He is wearing a very thin, deeply faded, wrinkled, conformed to his body, floor-length leather duster jacket, and a similar beaten-up, wide-brimmed leather cowboy hat. It honestly looked like maybe he'd lived and slept in these same clothes for years. We didn't allow hats, hoods, or sunglasses in the store, so I'm surprised that security didn't make him take off his hat. This man is at least 6'5" and built like a boulder, not obese kind of large too. I mean, pick you up and toss you like a ragdoll large. The stench that comes with him is honestly unlike anything that I'd ever smelled before or since. It was beyond BO, beyond anything really. It sort of smelled like actual death, as if he had raw rotting carcasses tucked under his thick, long leather coat. I thought that I had been hardened by plenty of nasty body odor stinks before, but this was absolutely revolting, far beyond anyone who hadn't showered lately or had even wet their pants or something. I'm trying not to inhale very deeply, and I say, "Hi sir, excuse me, I'm sorry, would you mind taking off your hat? It's just store policy." Big customer service smile. "So, what are you looking for today?" He sort of grunts deeply. He's walking very slow, shuffling and dragging his feet. His voice sounds like he gargles with gravel, rough and wet, raw and angry. "I don't take off my hat." At this point, I'm not trying to argue with this man about his hat either. Let's just get him in and out. I glance down and see that he's not wearing any shoes. The bit that I can see from under his coat, one of his ankles is massively purple, black and swollen, melon-sized. The bottoms of both of his feet are bloody and tore up. I realize that he is leaving a slight trail of blood as he drags his ragged feet across the concrete floor of the shop. My first thought is, how and why did security let this guy come in? Second is that this guy is obviously seriously injured, and that is concerning as a human being. I'm making sure to keep the display shelf between me and this guy, but that's only about a foot of space, like a bar. He gets to me and the stench gets stronger. I meekly but sincerely ask, are you alright, sir? His eyes flare at me. What do you care? And I'm like, well, I tried. Not my chair, not my problem. Not my monkeys, not my circus. Great, what can I get for you? He pulls up one of his sleeves to expose his forearm. It is covered in large, round burns like from a cigar. Some old, healed, and some fresh, and really infected and pussy. It's not track marks too, it's definitely burns. He also has a jagged, homemade-looking stick and a poke tattoo of a smiley face, a crooked circle, 2 lines for eyes, and a sort of scabbed-up curve of a smile. He points at his tattoo. Happy. My name's Happy. The rotting stink was so strong that I needed to breathe little gasps and the least possible that I could. I walked here. I walked all the way here from Pasadena. I'm like, wow, sir, that's a very long walk. Anyway, what are you looking for today? Just for you. His eyes are dark and menacing. He is smeared with a layer of grime, like he lives in the woods dirty. He doesn't look like the average crust punk or disabled veteran that you generally see living on the beach. It was hard to guess his age, but he wasn't that old or young, somewhere between 30 to 50. Honestly, he looked like he dragged himself here from his log cabin, like what would happen if you entangled some quantum mechanics pulley and mixed Ed Gein with an 1800s homesteader, then transported him to 2013 Venice Beach. I, of course, have never seen this man before. Once was more than enough to make him unforgettable, though. He keeps staring at me, and I move as far back as I can to the wall, hopefully out of his grasp if he lunged. I would need to walk out from behind the case and around him to get to the security. I'm honestly weighing my options at this point. I decide to grab a bunch of compassion grams and then I weigh out an eighth and mark it down. I'd pay it for later. And he's still just leering at me, wheezing heavy, stinky breaths. So, we actually have a special today, only for people who walked more than 10 miles to get here. This is all for you, on the house. Thank you for stopping by. He accepts the bag, but continues to just stand there and stare at me. Thank you, Happy. It worked. He grunts a guttural noise that is not a word, and slowly turns to shuffle back towards the door. At the door, he turns back towards me and says, I'll see you later. He finally walks out after, leaving plenty of his residual stench of death behind. Thank any and all of the gods, I did not see Happy later, or ever again. When I asked security why the heck did they let him in, he said that when he had noticed his bloody feet and said, Hey bro, you all good? That looks like it hurts. Happy had stepped up in his face and threatened to choke you out. Stupid N-word. And since it was just him and 2 22-year-old, 130-pound girls, he wasn't trying to die tonight and figured hopefully Happy could just get his stuff and leave. He was watching the camera in the back ready to call the police and the owners if anything got weird. But apparently, we had different definitions of weird. I understood his reaction and ultimately we were all fine. Just spooked and creeped out, thankfully. And now, needing to clean blood off the floor with bleach and gloves, and texting our boss that he definitely owed us some free weed after that. He agreed, and ironically enough, we all lived happily ever after. I'll try to keep this as accurate as possible, but It's been shoved deep in my memory bank for years now, and certain details are fuzzy, but this is what I remember. So, a little over a decade ago, I was working for the local cable or internet company. I was fresh out of high school, and it was my first real job. I should mention too that sometime in my preteen years, I developed a habit of snooping through people's things. Whether it was at a family member's house or friends, I would always manage to slip away into people's rooms, closets, bathrooms, etc., looking for secrets and hidden items and whatnot. I would never steal anything, of course, just take mental notes of things that I found and put them back without leaving a trace. So, as you can imagine, landing a job that placed me in people's houses to install cable was, well, almost guaranteed to stir up a desire to indulge in my long-forgotten habit. When installing wires for TVs and computers, I would often end up in crawl spaces, closets, behind desks, and sometimes under beds to reach outlets and such. I'd stumble on things like collections of sexually explicit material, embarrassing personal hygiene products, and more than a few times, extremely large collections of, well, toys, if you catch my drift. After a while, it went from stumbling upon these things to outright looking for them. Most homeowners were too lazy to follow me from room to room, so they'd either be downstairs or outside in the yard while I went about doing my job. Like I said, I wasn't taking anything with me, just observing. Now, about 4 or 5 months into me working this job, I ended up at a woman's house. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, I would guess, white with sandy blonde hair and a sort of hippie bohemian vibe that was popular around my area, mixed with a bit of emo, a weird combo, I know. But she had a pretty big house for a single person, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths and multiple living areas, but it appeared that she was the only one living there, other than her cat, who would occasionally run by as I was doing my job. But she let me know that she'd be outside on her porch, and to let her know if I needed anything. The house was quiet and big, so I knew that I would be able to hear her coming, and have plenty of time to clean up if I happened to do some snooping around. It was the perfect storm. All in all, though, it was pretty uneventful, to be honest. I carried on with my work, but I'd every so often take a peek around at her things. She was pretty hot to me, so I probably would have been excited to find something that would allude to her sexual side, but there was no such luck. Just papers, knickknacks, some stuff that appeared to be schoolwork. But peeking out from her pillow was a notebook, similar to the old cow print ones that we'd use in school. I knew for sure, given the placement, that it had to be a diary of some sort. I looked around to make sure that she was still outside, and then I cracked it open. It was boring. The first few pages were random notes, planning, grocery lists, far from the scandalous journaling and one-night stands that I'd hoped for. But just as I was about to put it back, I turned the page and I saw a few words that caught my eye. Something along the lines of panic, anxious, safe. And so, with concern and some excitement, I wanted to read a detailed story written in first person about her hitting a man over the head, realizing that he wasn't conscious any longer, recruiting help cleaning up the mess, and dumping the body in a nearby river. She also journaled about the anxiety and paranoia that she was feeling about everything that happened, and the stress of sharing the secret with the person who had helped her dump the body. I remember being extremely uneasy and feeling more creeped out in that house every minute that passed by. The silence of the house that I had previously found peaceful, it really started to bother me. Even the jingling of the cat's collar was beginning to haunt me a bit, like something out of a horror movie. I was terrified that I'd get caught and that she'd take me out to ensure that I wouldn't tell about what I'd read, but I managed to power through the job and I just got the heck out of there. On the drive home, I managed to convince myself that I probably just stumbled on her notes or an excerpt from some fictional novel that she was writing or something. It did read more like a novel than a personal diary passage, but honestly, there's just no telling. I laughed it off with a few friends later on, and I never really spoke much about it again. It's been so long now that I can barely remember the woman's face, her house, or even the town. But what I do remember, clear as day, is being very thankful that I never had to go back there again. I've been thinking about a weird thing that happened in my life some years ago. I felt like sharing it, and I mean, maybe somebody else has experienced something like this or can explain it to me. I'll start by saying that I'm really not a believer in the paranormal. I am a Christian, but I hardly believe in the demonic or angelic experiences. They're rare, if anything. I feel that they're far too rare for average people to experience and can be explained away by science majority of the time. Anyway, this happened probably about 6 years ago now. I'm 23, and I believe this happened when I was around 16 or 17. I lived with my mother, abusive stepfather, my younger sister, and my baby brother. I lived in the basement of the house just to get away from everything. It was really my only escape. It muffled the arguing and the fighting, that sort of thing, so it's where I opted to stay for most of the time. For anyone curious, my parents are affluent, or in other words, rich, and my stepfather had an influence in the community. CPS didn't care and the cops didn't care. Many times we called the cops, and many times CPS were called. Teachers and counselors and doctors were told, but nothing was ever really done about it. So it just got to the point where we stopped reporting anything and just lived in our own hell. One night though, after hours and hours of fighting and screaming and banging, I don't even know what was exactly happening. Neither of my siblings knew either. We are all the avoidant types. If we can stay out of the fight to avoid being hurt ourselves, and we did. But the house just suddenly went silent. It was a relief at first. I mean, I could finally go to bed, right? It was well after midnight at this point, and I had school to attend to in a few hours. As I was drifting off to sleep, that was when I heard a blood-curdling scream from my mum. It was so loud from the upstairs of the house that I could hear it in the basement. I immediately ran out of the room. I thought that she was being murdered or something. My one dog was throwing herself down the basement steps to get away as I was running the opposite direction up the stairs. I've never really run so fast to get upstairs before, running through the kitchen and living room to get up to her as well. Me and my siblings met each other outside of her bedroom door to hear her vomiting profusely in the master bedroom. I broke down the door to the bathroom and saw her over the toilet throwing up everything that she had. I asked her what was wrong, and she just refused to answer me. I noticed my stepfather was nowhere to be seen. My sister told me that he had left the house and drove off. My brother was crying at this point, and my sister was shaking. Really, I didn't know what to do. So I just kept asking her what she needed, but she wouldn't even talk to me. She would just throw up and sit staring into the toilet. Eventually, my brother ran crying into my mum's bedroom and climbed into her bed, my other dog already in bed too, so he climbed on top of her and hugged her. My mum got up and walked past me into the bedroom after him. All the lights were off in her room, so as she walked, she turned them all on. I followed after my mother while my sister said that she was exhausted, but stood in the doorway and didn't move to go anywhere, just sort of watching us. I went to ask my mother for the 100th time what the heck was going on, when she cut me off and said that she saw something evil. I joked and said, "Was it?" and my stepdad's name. She got mad and told me to just shut up and listen. My mother pointed up at the skylight into the ceiling. It was bright and I could see the moon in the clouds, and she said that she saw a pitch-black figure crawl across the ceiling. I didn't believe her. I told her that it must just be her imagination. She was still running on adrenaline and that she was just upset and needed to go to bed. She screamed at me at this point, furious, saying that her imagination would never run so wild that she'd find herself throwing up over it. I told her that her stomach was probably just upset anyhow, and that's why she threw up. She told me that she didn't care what I thought, so I just said, "Okay, well, I'm going off to bed myself. Good night." That sort of thing, and turned off the lights for her, She was in bed with my brother, so I didn't see a reason on leaving them on when I was leaving the room anyway. But when I did, she shrieked at me to turn the lights back on. So I did. Stunned, I turned around and I asked why. She was quiet before telling me that she didn't want to sleep in the dark. I don't know why this upset me, but I got mad and argumentative with her, that she didn't see anything, that is, that she was fine and everybody just needed to go to sleep. I turned off the lights and shined my phone's flashlight up at the skylight and showed her nothing was there, everything was fine. I turned to her while I was still holding the light up to gesture to her that she was just being irrational, and my sister in the hallway, and she screamed, pointing and wailing at the skylight. I looked up and I still saw nothing. I told my sister to be quiet, that she was making things worse, and she started yelling back at me that something was there. Something was on top of the skylight, but now it was gone. My mum then told my sister to get into bed with her, so she did. All three of them sat in the bed together, huddled up. I stood there staring, just confused. What were they all seeing that I couldn't? Then my brother screamed. The curtain that was covering the windows across them flew back, and at that I turned around. But once again, there was nothing. While it was odd that the curtains were flung open, nothing was out on the deck. Nothing was outside at all. But he was adamant that something was out there. I was even more angry at this point. I told them to stop acting so crazy, that there are far worse real things going on right now, and while everyone is screaming demon, my mother's husband could come back at any moment and make things actually scary. My mother told me to turn the lights back on and to get the heck out of her room, so I did. I slammed a door behind me and I went downstairs. I do remember vividly checking out the front doors, windows, to make sure my sister was right, that my stepfather was really gone, and sure enough, his truck wasn't there. I was angry and tired, so in the end, I just went back down to my room and tried to get some sleep. When I got down there, my 200-pound English Mastiff was in my bed, hiding her head in my pillows. I walked up to her and rubbed her back, and at that point, she turned back and snapped her teeth at me. I was shocked. I mean, this was not like her behavior towards me at all, like ever. I was mad, though, and told her to get down, and so she did. She got out of the bed and laid down beside it. I hopped into bed, and I went to go back to sleep. But that was when I felt it. I felt, and I know for sure, 2 pairs of hands gliding across my back at the exact same time that my dog started barking furiously. I jumped out of bed, turned on all the lights, but when I did, there was nothing. Nothing was there. I opened the curtains and looked outside, but still nothing. I remember at this point shaking so bad, and my dog just kept growling in my general direction. And I mean, what do you do in that situation other than just run? So I grabbed my dog's collar and pulled us both out of my room. I ran upstairs with her following after me. I turned on every light as I ran. I ran through the kitchen, the dining room, and the living room all over again and kept turning on the lights as I went. I got upstairs to my mum's room. All the lights were still on and her door was closed, but I opened it and went in, my dog following after me. I didn't say anything. I climbed into bed with them and my dog jumped up after me. All 4 of us slept in her queen-size bed with our 2 dogs that night. I didn't sleep though. My mum called us all out of school the next morning. My stepfather didn't come home until days later. And I've never had a paranormal experience since then. The problems, they continued. And to be honest, I don't know what to think of this all these years later. I've told people this story a few times, and every time, no one has any sort of explanation for me. I'm not sure if anyone has a good way to explain what happened, or maybe ease my mind, or if you even had a similar experience growing up in an abusive home or something. I don't know, but that's my terrible story. To ease your minds about my situation and my sibling situations, my sister and brother still live with my mother and stepfather, while I no longer do. I moved out 3 years ago. But oddly enough, my mother's husband has mellowed out in his old age. Both my siblings have said that he no longer fights like he used to, He's just petty and toxic, but not physically abusive like he used to be. He's not a good person to live with, but he's no longer targeting anyone, which is good. He just works long hours and doesn't come home until late. And my mum works long hours and works opposite schedules with him, so they rarely see each other. It's not a fun situation by any means, but at least everyone's safe, right? Well, at least according to them. If you made it this far, then thanks for listening. I'm going to try not to think about this situation too much now, but anyway, if you've got any information or if you know anything about this, then I would love to hear it. A few years back, my family and I went to stay at a beach house in Clearwater, Florida. The house is rented indefinitely by my husband's rich uncle. It's 3 stories with 2 master bedrooms on the middle floor and 2 bedrooms on the top floor. My husband's parents stayed in a master on the middle floor, and my husband and I stayed upstairs to be next to our 4-year-old daughter. Now, the morning after our first night there, my mother-in-law asked, "Did you guys hear someone banging on the door at like 3 a.m.? We didn't. She described it as being very loud and continued for some time. I thought that it was strange that she heard that and just stayed in bed and didn't wake anyone else or check it or anything. You have to walk up a large wooden staircase to get up to the front door. And I mean, why would someone be at our door at like 3 in the morning? What if they needed help? Personally, it would have scared me, I think, but she was from a different generation, so whatever, I guess. I didn't think about this conversation for a long time again, in fact. It was a while before I remembered that it took place and realized that it was actually relevant to what I experienced. You see, at some point in my trip, my husband and my mother-in-law decided to rent bikes and go for a ride. My father-in-law took my daughter outside to play on the beach, and I had the house to myself. My plan was to sit on the couch in the living room and just relax and read a book. It was a beautiful room with floor-to-ceiling windows to view the ocean. However, the wall to my left was a wall of doors, a closet, a laundry room, and a bathroom. I hadn't been reading my book long when I heard like a thud 3 times from the direction of the doors. You know the sound that it makes when you hit a hollow door? It's different from hitting something solid, and doors tend to have some wiggle room in the frame, so you can hear it shake just a bit. Well, I didn't think too much about it. I mean, houses make really weird noises sometimes, right? Maybe it was the dryer, maybe a mouse or something. No big deal. But it happened again, and still no big deal. I returned to my book. But it kept happening. The thuds were sort of frantic. There was no real pattern or measurable distance of time between the thuds. And so finally, I decided to get up. I was a little bit scared, so I stared towards the doors. Eventually, I was so scared that I moved to the sliding door that led to the balcony and beach access. I really didn't know what to think. I mean, what could possibly be hitting the door that much? At this point, it wasn't just a fluke. I didn't think it was an animal either. It wasn't the dryer, so what if someone was actually in there? I called my father-in-law and told him that I'm scared and need him to come and check it. He packed up my daughter and came back to find me on the balcony, too afraid to go back inside. I explained what was happening. He went inside to check things out, and of course the banging had stopped as soon as he arrived, so he didn't experience it. He checked all 3 rooms and found nothing that could have caused the noise, and in the end there just was no explanation. The rest of the trip went smoothly and nobody reported any strange noises after that. I didn't spend any time alone in the house after that though, so I really don't know what those noises were. I am interested in the paranormal, but I don't really believe anything, I guess. I have to experience it myself, and even then, it has to be completely undeniable. But this wasn't undeniable for me by any means. Part of me still thinks that there must have been some sort of an explanation. It's really the only weird and unexplained story that I have in my life, and as I've thought about it, I don't know, it just seems like something was really off. My mum passed away 3 weeks ago, and I don't know, I guess I find myself revisiting the memory because I so wish to believe that there's something beyond this. friend likes to go mushroom foraging, and one time she brought me with her. We got further and further into the woods, getting distracted by cool rocks or different mushrooms, or even just by talking. We were having a great time, just the two of us, until we stumbled into a clearing where there was a man sitting, skinning what looked like a deer. I was sort of froze for a second. I mean, I only moved to this yeehaw town about 1.5 years ago. I'm from the Bronx, where you can see some weird stuff, but I'm definitely not used to the hunting culture, I guess. My friend and I were just sort of frozen, though. The man looked up, covered in blood, and said, "You know it's not safe for girls like you out here, right?" Then he let out a really raspy laugh, instantly chilling my bones. He picked up his frighteningly large knife and just kept skinning the deer, and muttering about all the dangerous animals in these woods. My friend and I were just nodding, not sure what else to say or do, really. He looked back up at us and said, "There's the bears, sure, the mountain lions, the fisher cats, and the rabbit coons, but the most dangerous thing out here?" He leaned forward and pointed the knife. "Man, the most dangerous game there is." My friend and I, we made eye contact and just, booked it, running through the woods, through the bushes and thorns, and eventually we found our way back to her property. We're obviously not sure if creepy hunter guy was just scaring us for giggles, but, I mean, man, it was creepy. I'd like to think that he just got a bit of a kick out of scaring two teenagers, but holy smokes. I was not in the mood for this dude to pull a Robert Hansen on us, so we got out of there, quick smart. The story that I'm about to share happened to my brother, sister, and myself back in the early 90s. I've decided to share this story because of, a recent family tragedy, and it brought this experience to mind. I've been thinking about it a lot, so I've decided to share it. When I was a child, I grew up in a haunted house. I've had many terrifying experiences, odd things happening, but this is the one that tops the cake. I was 10 years old at the time. My two older sisters, 12 and 14, we had a foreign exchange student named Amy from Germany staying with us for 2 weeks at the time. She was very odd and quirky, but I sort of began to enjoy her personality. I should also add too that, and this will be important, we had a dog named Cookie. He was a Shih Tzu Yorkie mix, and due to his size, he could never jump up on a couch. He would try until you'd finally have to pick him up and put him up on there yourself or on a chair, etc. I'd never seen him be able to jump up on our couch. But this particular day, my parents both had to go into work at the same time and asked my older sister to watch us kids for the afternoon. We were playing and goofing around for a while. Amy started to go through our parents' junk closet to see if there would be something to play with, when she all of a sudden came out of the closet ecstatic holding a tape recorder. She starts wanting to record funny things and then listen to it back. It sounded fun, and we were all having a good time making farting noises or burping, stupid stuff that kids think is funny. When all of a sudden, Amy looks at us and says, "Let's make scary noises in the recorder." I was a little nervous since I knew that we had scary things in our home, but I went with it. As we're making these recordings, out of nowhere, Amy stood up straight and stared down the main hallway and looked directly into my room. I began to notice that she looked pale, so pale that it made me think that she sort of looked a little bit like a ghost. We were all sort of drawn and staring at her in confusion, when all of a sudden she brought up her right hand and covered her right eye. She put her hand down after a few seconds and then brought up her left hand, covered her left eye, and it was sort of as if she didn't believe what she was seeing or something. But it was at that point that I instantly felt the energy in the home become really thick, almost like the air got sucked out of it or something, like a vacuum. This all happened in maybe 30 seconds, but all of a sudden, Cookie ran towards my bedroom and was barking at the room. Then he whimpered and bolted down the hallway and jumped onto the couch. right after that moment, we started to hear, like, something run full force down the hall towards us. We couldn't see it, only hear it, but we all jumped on the couch and huddled together, sobbing and terrified. We could hear it running down the hall towards us. As it reached us, we felt this massive wind go through us, and then the running would start over again as if it was a repeat cycle. But the energy was overwhelming and terrifying. We could feel it every time that it ran through us as well. I've never felt that level of fear and terror in my entire life, and it's something that I'll never forget. This went on for some time though, and the neighbor to our left, that was a priest, heard us screaming and came over to check out what was happening. And as soon as he touched that doorknob, it instantly stopped. He came into us terrified and sobbing uncontrollably. He called my parents and they came home immediately. We never did hear from Amy again after that, and she left 3 days later. I have always wondered about her though, and the trauma she experienced staying with us and that effect. I hope she's okay now after what we went through in our home, but anyway, that's the story, and I'll swear by its truth until the day that I die. Me and my boyfriend, we absolutely adore hiking, and there are so many places to go because of where we live in Oregon. And one day, we decided to go hiking after 11 p.m. at night to one of the most used trails in our area. We have both been there multiple times throughout our lives, and neither of us were concerned about something happening. There was only one thing that we were kind of nervous about, and that was the wildfire that had just happened. We parked on the side of the road and walked to the start of the trail, and even though there was a fire, the path was actually very clean and stable. So we started walking up the trail when we just started talking about paranormal things like witchcraft and wendigos and stuff like that. Terrible move on our side, talking about things of that sort when you're hiking at night. But anyway, it should be noted that we both had flashlights, very good ones too, and we were both very observant as to where we were on the path. Like I said, we know this place too. As we got deeper into the conversation, we both realized in just a second that we were now all of a sudden not on a trail anymore or anywhere near one. I mean, it was like instantly, in a blink of an eye. All of a sudden I remember walking on the trail and then we just weren't. I freaked out and told him that we needed to start backtracking, but thankfully he said no because we couldn't see any trail around us or anything that we recognized. And I truly believe that if we had tried backtracking, I don't think that I would be writing this. He told me that we needed to start walking up the hill in hopes of either standing on a ledge to see where we were or to find another path. We walked for a while up the hill and thankfully we popped out on a fire road. We walked all the way down terrified and came out on the road about a mile from where our car was. There's just no way that we should have been where we were. Anyway, we eventually made it back, but I just wanted to share this experience because it was weird and I still have no explanation for it. If anyone has any opinion, then please do let me know because this one has me stumped. About 7 years ago, before I met my now husband, I joined a few dating apps. A few of my friends had wonderful experiences and even met their now spouses on there, so I figured that I'd give it a try. I was 21 at the time and had also recently lost quite a bit of weight and was tiny for the first time in my life, so I was ready to put myself out there. I didn't take it too seriously, let the men come to me sort of thing, and eventually there was a guy who caught my eye. His name was Watson. He was 23 and very handsome in my opinion. We matched on Bumble and kept talking for quite a while. It turned into texting, then phone calls, and then him asking to meet up. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that I have any superpowers or can tell the future, but when he asked to start seeing each other in person, I just had an off feeling in my gut. I thought maybe it was just anxiety, but Later, I found out that somehow I just knew. After blowing off plans and saying that I was busy multiple times, he got mad and blocked me on everything. That was fine. I felt a bit bad, to be honest, but I was also 21 and he gave me the creeps, so good riddance, really. Fast forward 6 months later, and I had met and started dating my now husband. It was around this time that I got a message from Watson on Facebook and let him know that I had met someone new and I wished him well. But he got really angry, oddly too, for someone that I had never met in person. He started calling me names, swearing a ton, so I blocked him. This was the last place that I hadn't blocked him on. Then came the spam accounts, the new Instagram handles, more name calling, which eventually actually became threats. Thankfully, he did back off and stop eventually. I was really relieved too, because I hadn't dealt with someone like this before or even after, so I was genuinely scared. But a year later, I was at Target shopping for some new shoes and makeup. I checked out, headed to my car, keys in hand. I had just opened my door after loading my trunk when I swear that I heard someone yelling my name. So I turned around thinking that it was a friend or a coworker, but no, it was Watson. I got into my car without a word. I definitely went into fight or flight mode and I was ready to fly. The last thing that I saw of him, though, was him standing in the middle of the Target parking lot after chasing my car. It's been years and I haven't heard or seen him again, and I hope to never have any other creepy encounters like that. But a point of advice for any of you guys out there looking for a girl on a dating app? Trust me, don't chase girls. We hate that. For context, I'm a 22-year-old woman, and this morning I was waiting near, but not quite at, the bus station that I always use. I was minding my business, talking to my friends via text on my phone, and regularly looking to see if my bus was coming. When suddenly, I heard someone calling my name. I looked around and saw nobody that I knew, so I went back to what I was doing. But 10 seconds later, I hear it again. This time, I notice that it's coming from a white car a few feet away from me. The first red flag is that I don't know anyone that owns a white car. I went to see who it was, making sure not to get too close to the car, and it was an old man that I'd never seen before in my life. He said, "Hello, I'm your Uber driver." I looked at him and asked him to repeat what he just said because I thought that I heard him wrong, but I hadn't. I gave him a confused look and told him that I wasn't waiting for an Uber, and when I did, he just sped away. I didn't get the chance to check the license plate or anything, but that was obviously scary on its own, but the worst part is that I think I have no idea who it was. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, I received a very, very long text message from someone that I didn't even have in my contacts. It started with hello and their name. "You don't know who I am, but I see your photos on Facebook every day." It detailed things that I've posted on there months ago, and he also complimented really weird parts of my body, my ears for example. He also gave me the number of moles that I have on my face, which I didn't even know myself, demonstrating that he had spent a long time examining me. It was obvious that he was trying to be romantic, but it absolutely came out as creepy instead. I must mention too that I don't have my phone number on Facebook either. I double checked because I thought that I never had it registered in there, and in fact I didn't. So I have no idea how or where he got it from. He had other private information that I didn't post either, and he didn't reveal his name or give any information that could lead me to finding out who he was. For real, that is. And while this was creepy, I just didn't answer and ignored it because, he wasn't threatening me or anything. I didn't consider it that serious, I guess. I still told all my friends just in case anything else happened, and thankfully nothing did, not even another text message. That is, until today. I really hope that I'm just being paranoid and that these are two separate incidences, but I can't help but think that if this person was able to get all that information so easily, he could have gotten my home address or routes that I take daily too. I've started sharing my live location at all times with my friends who are all worried about my safety since these incidents. I might go to the cops with this, but I'm really not sure if they'll take it seriously. Justice is trash here anyway, so even if I did, I really doubt that anything would come of it. So one day, my best friend and I were taking a shortcut to her house. It goes past a few houses and through a small area of the woods, crossing a 2-foot wide creek. This particular day, I was wearing one of those jackets that had earbuds as the strings. It was a must-have item as a 5th grader in 2010 or 11. As we're passing one of the houses, a couple of big dogs come running from it, jumping on us and obviously just wanting to play and be petted and whatnot. The owner of the house comes out, and I noticed right away that he was acting really sort of fidgety and nervous, saying stuff about the dogs like, "Oh, it's okay, they're nice, don't worry." We made small talk with him about the dogs for a few minutes and turned around to leave. About a minute or so later, we arrived at the small creek when I noticed that one of the rubber earbuds that was on my jacket was now gone, and I insisted on going back to look for it. The guy came back out again and even offered to help us. He asked what the material was made out of, and I said that it was made of rubber. We made small talk again. I think about the jacket and how cool it was. And anyway, he said that he was going to be right back with his metal detector. He walked away towards his shed, and I said to my friend, "Why does he need a metal detector? The earbud is made of rubber." Next thing you know, he's coming back with, and I kid you not, a rifle, and he was literally running towards us. When I'm telling you that we ran, I mean we flew. When we got to safety past the creek and near her house, I was telling her that we needed to call 911. She insisted that we not do that because her parents would have been mad at her. I explained to her with urgency why it's important that we do call the cops, but she just refused and I couldn't force her. I didn't call because I didn't want to do it alone, plus it would have been my first time calling them. I can't remember when or if I even told my parents that night what happened, but when I did tell them, they gaslit me and said that I was just crazy or overreacting, that I didn't really see that. I still think about this near every day and it still haunts me. A second time was again in the 5th grade, taking place after the first story, but I'm not really sure how long after. The friend from the previous story actually lived near a cemetery, about a 5-minute walk from her house, I would guess. It was a big cemetery too, and we liked to walk around it a lot. Plus, behind the cemetery was a shortcut through the woods to a big park, which was coincidentally right next to our school. This day, we were also with another good friend of ours. We were just walking around the cemetery this day when all of a sudden a blue truck pulls up next to us in the row next to where we were walking, about 10 feet away or so, not far. I could see 2 guys were in it, literally just staring at us, and I again got that weird feeling that I got with the first guy. It's hard to explain, but right before the shortcut in the woods is a fence with a sort of cutout that leads to a field of grass and a hill next to it that leads into the neighborhood of where my other friend lived. The hill was really a bunch of dead grass, weeds, sticks, cattails, etc. I told my friends that I had a bad feeling about these guys, that they were just staring at us and quite literally slowly following us with the truck. And so we booked it to that grass field and through that hill. I had all sorts of cuts and gashes from all the stuff that we were running through, but when we got to the top of the hill, we turned around and the truck was now parked at the top of the hill on the other side. And both men were outside of it, holding guns and rifles. I truly believe that they were coming after us, and they were visibly mad that we got away from them. I knew that they were after us too, because they would have had to have driven through the cutout in the fence, amongst the gut feelings, and just The entire situation was really sketchy. We ran to my friend's house though, noticed her parents, who truly didn't seem too worried, and drove my other friend and me home. I don't really even remember if I told my parents about it this time, since they gaslit me when I told them about the last time. But I just can't shake the fact that this really happened when I was in 5th grade, 10 or 11 years old. It's hard to believe how lightly my parents took the situation too. Quite honestly, I think I'm a bit traumatized about what happened, and I think about it a lot. Anyway, I just needed to tell some people about what happened, but I have trouble getting my thoughts into words, so thanks for listening. So this story takes place a few years ago when I was younger and dumber. I'd spent all my tax returns on a trip to see a friend of mine from high school, a foreign exchange student from Germany. For 2 weeks, I'd be living with her and the friends that she was living with in a secluded shack on a relatively unknown island of the northern coast of, well, sort of near Denmark. Sites included beaches and farms and fields. My friend was doing conservation work, if anyone's curious. All of her friends were very kind and genuine, but it would seem that one other on the island didn't think so. So around midnight one night, I saw something in the trees. Everyone else had gone to bed, and I was just sitting on the front porch with the neighborhood wild cat on my lap, having one of those stereotypical reflect on yourself in a foreign land moments while listening to the waves crashing on the beach just beyond the trees. And a few minutes later, I noticed that one of the trees sort of, well, moved. I didn't actually see it move per se. More like I noticed that the tree seemed somewhat wider than before, I guess. I looked down to see if the cat was seeing this, and I think that he was. He was definitely looking in the same direction that I was, but he hadn't stopped purring. I looked back to the tree, and that's when I noticed new branches peeking around the trunk. And then I make eye contact with dull yellow eyes. They looked to be whittled and painted onto the wood almost, yet staring into them felt as chilling and lifeless as looking into an insect eye, but still definitely alive. I instantly, though, felt every hair on my body raise on end as I realized that those new branches have since wrapped around the trunk of the tree. Someone or something was spying on me. Again, I looked down at the cat, and he's still very relaxed and purring. I, however, was not, and decided that it was time to go inside and go to bed. The rest of the trip went, well, pretty much great otherwise, but cut to a month or so later, and I'm back in the States, and my friend has since moved off the island and is attending university full-time. One of the friends that I made there was still on the island, though, and he sent me a message asking if I remember seeing that fairy creature in the woods that night. I said yes, and then he told me something that has since been giving me incessant anxiety, especially whenever in the woods alone. You see, he and a visiting prospect were heading out for a nighttime walk along the beach, just a short stroll through the woods, when the prospect stepped on a mass that felt like jam, he said. They turned on their phone flashlights and saw up close that what I had thought was a fae, it was actually a man in a ghillie suit, and he was passed out next to a puddle of vomit. In the following moments, my friend proceeded to call emergency services. Police and ambulance arrived to take him away, and while they were putting the man on the stretcher, my friend said that he saw the police remove a machete and a small string of chicken wire from the man's person. The police only followed up once, and to summarize, what they said was, an unnamed drunk citizen passed out on our property. If it happens again, give us a call. No mention of the machete or chicken wire at all. My friend said that he asked about this, but the person on the other line either didn't budge or genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. All the people that I met on the island have since left, and so I really have had no updates since then. I still have no idea what that man was planning on doing, but I have a hunch that whatever it was, it wasn't good. I'm especially sure of this because I did see him a month before peeking out at me from behind a tree. I really don't want to think about what was going on inside of his head, but I worry for the safety of those volunteers there now, and what that random man might be planning to do to them.